The mountain wind carried secrets that winter, and Lydia Hale was about to become one of them. When a stranger in threadbare clothes offered marriage to save her dying father, the whole town pitied her. They whispered she'd traded herself for nothing, a lifetime of poverty with a man who had less than she did. But as Crowe led her deeper into the wilderness, past roads that shouldn't exist, and through valleys no map had ever shown, Lydia began to understand. The poorest man in town had just made her the richest woman in the territory. This is her story. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The debt collector's horse stood outside the Hale cabin like a tombstone waiting to be carved. Lydia pressed her forehead against the cold window glass, watching Samuel Garrett dismount with the casual confidence of a man who'd foreclosed on a dozen families that month alone. His leather satchel bulged with papers, deeds, promissory notes, liens, legal words that meant the same thing in any language. You're finished. Lydia, her mother's voice cracked from the doorway. Your father's asking for you. She didn't turn immediately. Instead, she counted the fence posts visible through the frost-etched window. 14. Her father had built them when she was 7 years old, before the cough started, before the medicine bills began piling up like winter snow, before everything good in their lives had been slowly, methodically buried under debts they could never repay. The cabin was dying the same way her father was, one piece at a time. The roof leaked in 3 places now. The stove burned through firewood twice as fast because the door didn't seal properly anymore. Even the land itself seemed exhausted, the soil too tired to produce anything but memories of better harvests. Lydia, please. She turned finally, taking in her mother's hollow cheeks, the way her dress hung loose where it used to fit snugly. Margaret Hale had been beautiful once. Lydia had seen the daguerreotype from her parents' wedding day, her mother's eyes bright, her smile unguarded. That woman was gone now, replaced by this brittle thing made of worry and sleepless nights. How much time did Mr. Garrett give us? Lydia asked, though she already knew the answer. 2 weeks, maybe 3 if we can convince him we're good for... We're not good for anything, Mama. We all know it. The words came out harsher than she'd intended, but neither of them flinched. They were past the point of comforting lies. Her father's room smelled of camphor and defeat. Thomas Hale lay propped against pillows that had gone gray from use, his breathing wet and labored. At 43, he looked 70. The consumption had eaten him from the inside out, turning a man who'd once carried full-grown calves across his shoulders into this wasted collection of bones and papery skin. Lydia, girl. His voice was barely a whisper. Come here where I can see you proper. She sat on the edge of his bed, careful not to jostle him. Even small movements caused him pain now. I heard Garrett's voice, he said. Loud bastard never learned to whisper. Don't talk, Papa. Save your strength. For what? A wet cough shook him. When it passed, there were flecks of blood on his lips. I'm dying, Lydia. We can all stop pretending otherwise. Papa, listen to me. His hand found hers, the grip surprisingly strong. I failed you, failed your mother. Built a life on this mountain that turned out to be nothing but... You didn't fail anyone, you got sick. That's not the same thing, isn't it? His eyes, once the same bright blue as hers, had gone milky around the edges. A man's supposed to provide for his family, protect them. I'm leaving you with nothing but debts and a cabin that'll be Garrett's property before the month's out. Lydia felt something crack inside her chest, but she kept her face composed. She'd learned early that crying solved nothing. Tears were a luxury, like fresh meat or new shoes, something other people could afford. We'll figure something out, she said. You always were a terrible liar. He squeezed her hand. But I love you for trying. Outside, she could hear Mr. Garrett's voice rising in discussion with her mother. The walls were thin. Every word carried. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hale, but sympathy doesn't pay bills. The bank wants their money, and they'll get it one way or another. If you can't pay, we'll auction everything, the land, the cabin, the livestock, whatever furniture is worth taking. We just need a little more time. Time is exactly what you don't have. Lydia stood, her jaw set. I'll handle this, Papa. Lydia, wait. But she was already gone, her boots striking hard against the wooden floor as she marched into the main room. Garrett turned, his expression shifting from dismissive to appraising as she entered. She hated that look, hated the way his eyes traveled over her like she was livestock being evaluated for sale. "Miss Hale," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "perhaps you can talk sense into your mother." "How much?" Lydia asked flatly. "I beg your pardon?" "How much do we owe? Total." Garrett smiled, pulling a ledger from his satchel. $317.42, plus accruing interest, of course. The number hit like a physical blow. $300 might as well have been $3 million. Her father had never earned more than $60 in a good year, and they hadn't had a good year in a very long time. "And if we can't pay? Then I'll be back on the 15th of the month with a sheriff's order. You'll have until sundown to remove your personal effects. Everything else becomes property of the bank." "There has to be another way," Margaret whispered. "There isn't." Garrett closed his ledger with a decisive snap. "I've seen 100 families like yours, Mrs. Hale. The ending is always the same. You might as well accept it now and save yourself the false hope." He tipped his hat again, a mockery of courtesy, and turned toward the door. He'd almost reached it when Lydia spoke again. "What if I could earn it?" Both Garrett and her mother turned to stare. "Earn it?" Garrett's laugh was sharp and unkind. "Doing what exactly? There's not enough sewing work in 3 counties to earn that kind of money. Unless you're suggesting something less respectable." "Watch your mouth," Lydia snapped, her voice like a whip crack. Garrett's smile faded. For a moment, something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Then he shrugged. "Reality doesn't care about your pride, Miss Hale. You have 2 weeks. After that, this conversation is over." The door slammed behind him. Margaret sagged into a chair, her hands covering her face. Lydia stood frozen, her mind racing through impossible calculations. $300. 2 weeks. There was no combination of work, no miracle, no prayer that could bridge that gap. She was still standing there when she heard the second horse. This one approached slowly, the hoofbeats measured and deliberate. Lydia moved to the window, her curiosity briefly overriding her despair. The rider was tall, dressed in worn canvas and rough wool that marked him as a mountain man, someone who lived in the high country where civilization thinned out to nothing. His hat was pulled low, and a dark beard obscured most of his face. The horse he rode was nothing special, a sturdy mountain-bred animal built for endurance rather than show. He dismounted with the fluid economy of someone who'd spent more time on horseback than on foot, tied his reins to the fence post, and walked toward the cabin. Margaret lifted her head. "Who on earth?" The knock came firm, but not aggressive. Lydia opened the door. Up close, the man was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with gray eyes that seemed to catalog everything in a single glance. His face was weathered, but not old, his hands calloused, but clean. There was something about the way he held himself, a kind of contained alertness that reminded her of the hunting cats that sometimes appeared at the forest's edge. "Miss Hale?" His voice was deep, roughened by wind and altitude. "Yes. My name is Ethan Crowe. I have a proposition for you." Lydia's mother appeared at her shoulder. "Sir, if this is about charity, we don't accept—" "It's not charity." Ethan's eyes never left Lydia's face. "It's a business arrangement. May I come in?" Every instinct told Lydia to refuse. Strange men didn't appear at isolated cabins with business propositions, especially not for unmarried women. But desperation was a powerful solvent, dissolving caution the way water dissolved salt. "5 minutes," she said, stepping aside. He entered, removing his hat to reveal dark hair shot through with premature gray. He didn't sit when offered a chair, instead remaining standing with his back to the far wall, a position Lydia noted that let him see both the door and the windows simultaneously. "I'll be direct," Ethan said. "I need a wife. You need money. I'm prepared to pay off your family's debts in exchange for marriage." The silence that followed was profound. Margaret found her voice first. That's outrageous. Are you suggesting my daughter is for sale?" "I'm suggesting a contract." Ethan reached into his coat and produced a leather wallet. From it, he extracted a bank draft and handed it to Lydia. $400, enough to clear your debts and leave you with money to spare. In exchange, you marry me and come live at my home in the high country. Lydia stared at the draft. The numbers seemed to swim before her eyes. $400. More money than she'd seen in her entire life. Why? She asked. Why what? Why do you need to buy a wife? You seem capable. Surely there are women who would marry you willingly. Something that might have been amusement flickered across Ethan's face. Perhaps I value honesty over romance. A business arrangement is clear. No false expectations. No disappointment. And what exactly would you expect from this arrangement? A wife in name and function. Someone to manage a household. Someone... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Someone who understands that some things are worth more than money. That's not an answer, Lydia said. It's the only answer I'm offering today. Margaret stepped between them. Absolutely not. Lydia, put that draft down right now. This is insane. Is it? Lydia didn't look away from Ethan's gray eyes. More insane than watching Papa die knowing we'll be homeless before he's even buried? More insane than being thrown off our land with nothing? There has to be another way. There isn't, Mama. You know there isn't. Ethan remained silent, letting them argue, his expression unreadable. You don't know anything about this man, Margaret insisted. He could be anyone. He could be dangerous. So is poverty, Lydia said quietly. So is watching everything we've ever worked for get sold to strangers. She turned back to Ethan. I'll need to see your home first. I'm not agreeing to anything blind. That's not possible. Then neither is this. She held the draft out to him. For a long moment, Ethan didn't move. Then slowly, he nodded. Fair enough. I can tell you this. The home is remote, but it's substantial. You won't lack for shelter or food. You'll have your own space, your own privacy if you want it. I'm not looking for a servant, Miss Hale. I'm looking for a partner. A partner in what? In survival. In building something that lasts. He took the draft back, but instead of pocketing it, he laid it on the table. I'll leave this here. You have until tomorrow evening to decide. If you agree, bring one bag of personal items and meet me at the North Crossroads at dawn the day after. If you don't come, I'll understand. And the money? Margaret asked sharply. If she agrees, it's hers regardless. The debt gets paid whether the marriage works or not. I keep my word, Mrs. Hale. That's something you can count on. He replaced his hat and moved toward the door. Lydia followed. Mr. Crowe? He turned. Spot. Why me? Specifically? For the first time, his expression softened slightly. Because I watched you stand up to Samuel Garrett without flinching. Because you asked how much instead of how to run. Because desperation hasn't made you weak. It's made you sharp. I need someone sharp, Miss Hale. The mountains don't forgive softness. Then he was gone, leaving only the sound of hoofbeats fading into the gathering dusk and a bank draft that represented either salvation or the worst mistake of Lydia's life. That night, the Hale cabin was filled with argument. You can't seriously be considering this, Margaret said for perhaps the 20th time. She paced the small kitchen, her hands twisting a dish towel into knots. Marriage isn't something you just purchase like flour or nails. People have been arranging marriages for practical reasons since the beginning of time, Mama. Lydia sat at the table, the bank draft in front of her like a piece of evidence in a trial. At least this way, I know what I'm getting into. Do you? You don't know anything about this man. He could be violent. He could be unstable. He could be our only chance. Thomas's voice came from the bedroom, weak but clear. Let her speak, Margaret. Margaret's face crumpled. Thomas, you can't possibly approve of this. Come here, both of you. They gathered in his room, Margaret sitting on one side of the bed, Lydia on the other. Thomas looked between them, his eyes bright with fever and something else, a kind of terrible clarity that comes near the end. I'm not going to live long enough to see how this turns out, he said bluntly. We all know it. So I'm going to say my piece while I still can. He took Lydia's hand. You're 22 years old, and you've already spent 5 years watching this family fall apart. You've put off every chance at a normal life to take care of me. You've never complained, never asked for anything. But I see how you look out that window sometimes, like you're searching for something that isn't there. Papa, let me finish. This Crowe fellow, I don't know him, don't know what he's offering, but I know you, Lydia girl. You're the smartest person I ever met and the strongest. If you think this is worth the risk, then I trust your judgment. Margaret made a sound of protest. But, Thomas continued, squeezing Lydia's hand, I also want you to know you have a choice. We'll figure something out. We always have. No, we won't, Lydia said gently. And that's okay. This isn't about giving up. It's about choosing the best option we actually have, not the one we wish we had. She looked at her mother. I know this isn't what you wanted for me. I know you dreamed I'd marry for love, have a real wedding, build a normal life. But Mama, this is my life. Right here, right now. And I'd rather face an uncertain future with this stranger than watch us all drown in debt waiting for a miracle that's never coming. Margaret was crying now, silent tears that tracked down her worn face. What if he hurts you? Then I'll leave. The money will be paid either way. He said so himself. I'll come home. What if there is no home to come back to? Lydia had no answer for that. They sat in silence for a long time, the lamp burning low, the wind picking up outside. Finally, Thomas spoke again. If you do this, you do it smart. Keep some money hidden. Learn the land. Make yourself valuable enough that he needs you, not just wants you. And remember, a contract works both ways. He's buying your presence, not your soul. Thomas! Margaret looked scandalized. It's practical advice, Margaret. If she's going to do this thing, she might as well do it right. Lydia almost smiled. Even dying, her father was teaching her how to survive. The next day passed in a blur of preparation and second-guessing. Lydia sorted through her possessions, trying to decide what to bring. One bag, Ethan had said. Everything else would stay behind. She chose carefully, her mother's sewing kit, a few changes of clothes, her father's watch, a small leather journal her grandmother had given her. Practical items mixed with sentiment. Word had spread through the small settlement with the speed that news always traveled in isolated communities. By midday, 3 neighbors had stopped by, their curiosity barely disguised as concern. Is it true you're marrying Ethan Crowe? Sarah Mitchell asked, her eyes bright with gossip. That mountain hermit who comes down twice a year for supplies? I'm considering it. But Lydia, nobody knows anything about him. He could be anyone. There are stories. What kind of stories? Sarah lowered her voice conspiratorially. Just rumors, really. Some people say he's hiding from something. Others say he found gold up in the high country and doesn't want anyone to know. My husband heard he used to be a soldier, saw terrible things in some war. Nobody really knows. Then they're just stories, Lydia said firmly, not facts. After Sarah left, Margaret brought her tea. They sat together at the kitchen table, not speaking, just being present with each other in the way they'd learned during the long vigil of Thomas's illness. I put together a package, Margaret said finally. Some food, a few medical supplies, that blue shawl you always liked. Things you might need. Mama, you should keep. I want you to have them. Margaret's voice was fierce. You're my daughter, Lydia. Whether you marry this man or not, whether you stay or go, you're my daughter. That doesn't change. They held each other then, 2 women who'd survived more than most people ever would, preparing to survive a little more. That evening, Lydia walked to her father's room one last time as his daughter alone. Tomorrow then, Thomas said. Tomorrow. No regrets? She thought about it honestly. I'm terrified. But no regrets. This feels like the right kind of wrong decision, if that makes sense. He laughed, which turned into a cough. When he recovered, he said, You're going to be fine, Lydia girl. Better than fine. You're going to surprise yourself with how strong you really are. I learned from the best. Your mother? Both of you. She kissed his forehead, memorizing the feel of his papery skin, the smell of camphor and sickness that had become so familiar. Tomorrow she'd be married. Tomorrow she'd leave everything she'd ever known. Tomorrow her entire life would change. But tonight, for a few more hours, she was still just Lydia Hale, daughter of Thomas and Margaret, standing in the cabin where she'd grown up, making peace with the woman she was about to become. Dawn came cold and gray, the sky the color of old iron. Lydia dressed in her best dress, dark blue wool that her mother had made 3 years ago, still serviceable, if not fashionable. She pinned her dark hair up in a simple style, looking at herself in the small mirror above the wash basin. The face that looked back was familiar, but somehow changed. The same blue eyes, the same straight nose, the same firm mouth. But there was something different in the set of her jaw, the directness of her gaze. This was a woman who'd made a choice, for better or worse. That kind of decision left its mark. Margaret insisted on making breakfast, though none of them could eat much. They moved through the morning rituals with exaggerated care, as if by performing each task perfectly, they could hold back the inevitable moment of departure. Finally, there was nothing left to do but go. Lydia picked up her bag, heavier than she'd expected with her mother's additions. Margaret wrapped the blue shawl around her shoulders, her hands lingering on Lydia's arms. "You write to us," she said. "Whatever happens, you write, even if it's just a line to let us know you're alive." "I will, Mama, I promise. And if things go wrong, if he's not what he seems, you come straight home. We'll figure something out." "I know." They looked at each other, both knowing that home might not exist by the time any letter could arrive. The bank draft had been delivered to Samuel Garrett yesterday afternoon with instructions to clear the Hale family's debts. But that only bought them time, not a future. Eventually, the land would still fail them, the cabin would still decay. Lydia leaving didn't solve everything, it just solved the most immediate crisis. Thomas was too weak to rise, but he called out as she passed his door. "Lydia." She stopped, fighting tears. "Be brave, but not reckless. Be kind, but not soft. And remember, you always have value, no matter what anyone else says. You hear me?" "I hear you, Papa." "Good. Now go. And don't look back." Looking back never helped anyone. She walked out of the cabin without glancing behind her, her father's words ringing in her ears. The North Crossroads were exactly a mile from the Hale property, where the main trail split into paths leading deeper into the mountains. It was a lonely spot, marked only by a weathered signpost and a cairn of stones that some long-ago traveler had built for reasons now forgotten. Ethan Crowe was already there. He stood beside two horses, his own mountain-bred gelding and a smaller mare with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor. He'd cleaned up since their first meeting. His beard was trimmed, and he wore what might have passed for formal clothes in the backcountry: a clean shirt, a dark vest, trousers without patches. "Miss Hale," he said as she approached, "I wasn't certain you'd come." "I almost didn't. What changed your mind?" "I ran out of better options." He almost smiled. "Honest, I appreciate that." From his saddlebag he produced a small book and a piece of paper. "I took the liberty of having a circuit preacher draw up a marriage certificate. He's waiting a quarter-mile up the trail. If you're still willing, we can make this legal right now." Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the last moment she could turn back. After this, there would be no undoing what came next. She thought of her father dying by inches in that dark bedroom, her mother's hollow cheeks, the debt collector's satisfied smile, the cabin that was really just a pile of wood waiting to collapse. She thought of Ethan's gray eyes, the way he'd stood in their cabin without fidgeting or false sympathy, the bank draft that had appeared like magic, the promise of something, anything, different from the slow death she'd been living. "I'm willing," she said. They rode in silence to where the preacher waited, an elderly man with kind eyes and arthritic hands who asked no questions beyond the legal necessities. The ceremony, if it could be called that, took less than 5 minutes. Lydia repeated words she barely heard, her mind strangely distant, as if this were happening to someone else. "Do you, Lydia Ann Hale, take this man?" "Did she? Did she really?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory, I pronounce you man and wife." The preacher signed the certificate with shaking hands. Ethan signed. Then he handed the pen to Lydia. Her hand was steady as she wrote her name, her old name, for the last time. When she finished, she was Lydia Crowe. A wife. A stranger to herself. Ethan paid the preacher with gold coins that caught the weak morning light. Then it was just the two of them, married now, standing at a crossroads in more ways than one. "The mare is yours," Ethan said, gesturing to the smaller horse. "Her name is Slate. She's sure-footed and good-tempered. You'll need both where we're going." Lydia approached the horse slowly, letting Slate smell her hand before stroking the soft nose. The mare nickered softly, and Lydia felt an unexpected rush of affection. At least she'd have one friend in whatever came next. "How far?" she asked. 2 days if the weather holds." 3 if it doesn't. And where exactly are we going? North and up, into the high country. That's not an answer. It's the only one I'm giving until we get there. His voice wasn't unkind, but it was firm. I need you to trust me, Mrs. Crowe. Can you do that? Mrs. Crowe. The name sounded foreign, like words in a language she'd never quite learned. I can try, she said. They mounted their horses and turned north, toward the mountains that rose like teeth against the gray sky. Behind them, the last wisps of smoke from morning cook fires marked the settlement that had been Lydia's entire world. She didn't look back. The trail climbed steadily, winding through pine forests thick with shadow. Ethan led, moving with the confidence of someone who'd traveled this route 100 times. Lydia followed, her body settling into the rhythm of riding, her mind churning with questions she didn't ask. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat, dried meat and hard biscuits that Ethan produced from his saddlebag. They ate in silence, the only sounds the wind in the trees and the distant cry of a hawk. You're not much for conversation, Lydia observed. I'm not much for useless talk, Ethan replied. If you have questions, ask them. Otherwise, quiet is fine with me. All right. Question. What did you do before you became a hermit in the mountains? Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. I worked. Same as anyone. Doing what? Different things. None of them particularly interesting. You're being evasive. I'm being private. There's a difference. Lydia bit back a sharp retort. She was stuck with this man now, bound to him by law and necessity. Starting a fight on the first day seemed unwise, but as they rode on, she studied him when she thought he wasn't looking. The way he sat his horse spoke of years in the saddle. His hands, though calloused, moved with precision when he adjusted his gear. And there was something about his awareness, the way his eyes constantly scanned the landscape, noting details she couldn't see, that suggested training beyond what a simple mountain man would need. Who are you really, Ethan Crowe? She thought. And what have I gotten myself into? They made camp that evening in a small clearing beside a stream. Ethan set up a lean-to with practiced efficiency, while Lydia tended the horses, brushing them down and checking their hooves the way her father had taught her years ago. You know horses, Ethan observed, building a fire. My father raised them when I was young, before we lost the breeding stock to a fever. That's where you learned to ride? That's where I learned a lot of things. How to work, how to survive, how to make do with less. She glanced at him across the growing flames. Useful skills for a mountain wife, I imagine. Useful skills for anyone. They ate in companionable silence, rabbit that Ethan had shot with a rifle he'd produced from his saddle with casual expertise. Lydia hadn't even heard the shot, which meant he'd killed it earlier in the day and field-dressed it while she wasn't looking. More evidence of competence that didn't quite match the threadbare persona he'd presented in town. As darkness fell complete, the temperature dropped. Lydia wrapped herself in the blue shawl, grateful for her mother's foresight. The fire pushed back the cold, creating a small sphere of warmth and light in the vast darkness of the mountain night. You should sleep, Ethan said. We have a hard climb tomorrow. What about you? I'll keep watch for a while. Old habits. From what? He looked at her across the fire, his face half in shadow. From learning that the mountains don't care if you're tired. They'll kill you just as easy sleeping as waking if you're not careful. It wasn't really an answer, but Lydia was learning to recognize when Ethan had closed a door. She settled into the lean-to, wrapped in blankets that smelled of horses and pine smoke, and tried to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind replayed the day. The ceremony, the ride, the strange reality of being married to a man she didn't know. Somewhere in the darkness, Ethan moved quietly, checking the horses, feeding the fire, doing whatever mysterious things he did when he thought she wasn't paying attention. She must have dozed eventually because she woke to find dawn breaking cold and clear, and Ethan already up, coffee brewing over a rebuilt fire. Morning, he said, handing her a tin cup. You didn't sleep at all. I slept enough. They broke camp efficiently, working together with the awkward coordination of two people who didn't yet know each other's rhythms. Then they were riding again, climbing higher into mountains that seemed to grow more rugged with each mile. The trail became narrower, more treacherous. In places, it was barely wide enough for a single horse, with sheer drops falling away to one side. Lydia's hands went white-knuckled on the reins, but Slate moved with calm confidence, following Ethan's gelding without hesitation. "Don't look down," Ethan called back. "Look where you want to go, and trust your horse." Lydia forced herself to breathe, to loosen her death grip on the reins. Slate immediately moved more smoothly, responding to the reduced tension. They climbed for hours, the air growing thinner and colder. Just when Lydia thought they couldn't possibly go higher, the trail leveled out, and they emerged onto a plateau that took her breath away. Mountains surrounded them on all sides, their peaks white with snow even in early autumn. A valley stretched below, hidden from the lower elevations, accessible only through the narrow pass they'd just navigated. And in the distance, barely visible through the pines, Lydia could make out structures, buildings where no buildings should be. Ethan pulled his horse to a stop, letting her absorb the view. "Welcome home, Mrs. Crowe," he said quietly. And Lydia realized with a mixture of wonder and apprehension that the poor mountain man she'd married had just led her to a hidden valley that no map had ever shown, to a home that wasn't a cabin, but something else entirely, something he still wasn't ready to explain. The real journey, she understood with sudden clarity, was just beginning. The descent into the valley should have been easier than the climb, but Lydia found it somehow more unnerving. Every switchback revealed new impossibilities, a road too well maintained for a wilderness trail, stone markers placed at regular intervals, even what looked like a water channel carved along the hillside with deliberate engineering. This wasn't the work of a single hermit. This was infrastructure, organized and intentional. Ethan said nothing as they rode, but Lydia caught him watching her reactions from the corner of his eye, as if measuring how much she could handle before demanding explanations. She kept her questions to herself. For now. The valley floor was broader than it had appeared from above, stretching perhaps 2 miles across and 5 miles long. The forest here was different, managed, she realized. The trees grew in patterns too regular to be natural, with clear spaces between them that allowed light to reach the forest floor. Someone had been clearing deadwood, preventing the kind of dense undergrowth that would make travel difficult. "How long have you lived here?" Lydia asked, breaking the hours-long silence. "On and off for 5 years, permanently for the last 3. And before that?" "Other places." His tone made it clear the subject was closed. They followed a creek that widened into a substantial stream, its banks lined with stones that looked deliberately placed. The water ran clear and fast, the sound of it filling the valley with constant white noise that would mask other sounds, approaching riders, raised voices, the crack of gunfire. Lydia's unease deepened. This valley wasn't just hidden, it was defensible. Whoever had chosen this location had been thinking about protection, about controlling access, about keeping secrets. "Ethan," she said carefully, "what exactly am I getting into?" He pulled his horse to a stop, turning to face her fully for the first time since they'd entered the valley. His gray eyes were serious, weighing something she couldn't identify. "A complicated life," he said finally, "but an honest one, once you're in it. I need you to hold your questions a little longer, Lydia, another hour, then I'll answer what I can." "What you can," she repeated. "Not what you will. Some answers aren't mine to give, but the ones that are, I'll share. That's the best I can offer." It wasn't enough, but it would have to be. Lydia nodded, and they rode on. The buildings appeared gradually, revealed by the curve of the valley rather than announced by any dramatic vista. First, a barn. Massive, well-constructed, with a stone foundation and a roof that showed recent repair. Then another barn, and what looked like a stable. A workshop with a chimney from which pale smoke rose into the afternoon air. A storehouse with double doors and a loading dock. And finally, set back from the other structures on a slight rise, the lodge itself. Lydia's breath caught. It wasn't a mansion in the city sense, no columns or ornate facades, but it was substantial in a way that defied everything Ethan had implied about his life. 2 stories of solid timber construction with wide windows that caught the afternoon light, a wraparound porch, and a stone chimney at each end. The craftsmanship was evident even from a distance. This was a building meant to last generations, built by people who knew what they were doing and had the resources to do it right. As they approached, Lydia saw people. A man emerged from the workshop, pausing to watch their arrival. Two women crossed between buildings carrying baskets. A boy who couldn't have been more than 15 led a team of horses toward one of the barns. They all stopped what they were doing when they noticed Ethan, their expressions shifting through surprise to something like relief. "Mr. Crowe?" the man from the workshop called out. He was perhaps 40, with the powerful build of someone who worked with his hands for a living. "Didn't expect you back for another week." "Plans changed, Samuel." Ethan dismounted, then moved to help Lydia down from Slate. His hands on her waist were brief and impersonal, but the workers noticed. Their eyes went from Ethan to Lydia and back again, questions forming on every face. "This is my wife," Ethan said simply. "Lydia Crowe. She'll be living here. I expect everyone to make her welcome." The silence that followed felt weighted, significant. Samuel's eyebrows rose almost to his hairline. One of the women, older, gray-haired, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent a lifetime outdoors, smiled slowly, as if something long-awaited had finally arrived.
"Well now," the older woman said, approaching with her hand extended. "That's news worth celebrating. Welcome, Mrs. Crowe. I'm Martha Hales, the housekeeper. This has been a bachelor establishment far too long." Lydia shook her hand, finding Martha's grip firm and her eyes shrewd. "Thank you, though I'm not sure what I'm being welcomed to." "Understanding," Martha said. "That's what you're being welcomed to. And it'll come in time." She shot Ethan a look that held equal parts reproach and amusement. "Though I see Mr. Crowe has been his usual forthcoming self." "Martha," Ethan said warningly. "Don't you Martha me, Ethan Crowe. This poor girl looks like she's walked into a riddle wrapped in a mystery." Martha turned back to Lydia. "Come on, dear, let's get you settled. The men can handle the horses." Before Lydia could respond, Martha had taken her arm and was steering her toward the lodge. Lydia glanced back once to see Ethan watching, his expression unreadable. Then Martha was guiding her up the porch steps and through a heavy oak door into the interior. The inside of the lodge matched the outside for quality and scale. The entryway opened into a large main room with a massive stone fireplace, comfortable furniture that showed use but not abuse, and details that spoke of both money and taste. A good carpet on the polished wood floor, oil lamps with clean glass chimneys, bookshelves lined with what had to be hundreds of volumes. "I'll show you to your room," Martha said, leading her up a staircase of solid timber. "Mr. Crowe has the master suite on the south end. I've prepared the suite on the north end for you. Separate quarters seemed appropriate, given the circumstances." "You knew he was getting married?" "I knew he'd gone down mountain for a wife. Didn't know if he'd come back with one." Martha opened a door at the end of the upstairs hallway. "Here we are." The room beyond was larger than the entire main room of Lydia's family cabin. A four-poster bed dominated one wall, covered in what looked like a hand-stitched quilt. There was a wardrobe, a dresser with a mirror, a writing desk positioned near the window, and a door that led to what Martha identified as a private washroom. "There's running water," Martha said, demonstrating the pump beside the sink. "We have a spring-fed system. Cold water year-round, but we can heat water in the kitchen for baths. That door there connects to the master suite, but it locks from both sides. Your privacy is your own, Mrs. Crowe." Lydia moved to the window. From here, she could see the entire compound, the barns, the workshops, the gardens she hadn't noticed from below. And beyond the buildings, the forest and the mountains rising in every direction, sealing this valley off from the outside world. "How many people live here?" she asked. "Depends on the season. Winter, maybe 20. Summer, closer to 40. Workers come and go. Some have families in the lower settlements, come up for seasonal work. Others stay year-round." Martha paused. "We're largely self-sufficient here. Grow our own food, raise our own livestock, make most of what we need. It's a good life, if somewhat isolated." "And what exactly is this place?" Martha's smile was sympathetic. "That's a question for Mr. Crowe, I'm afraid. It's not my story to tell. But I will say this. Whatever you're thinking, whatever you're worried about, it's probably not as bad as your imagination is making it. Ethan's a good man, Mrs. Crowe. Complicated, certainly. Secretive, absolutely. But good." A knock came at the door. Ethan's voice called, "May I come in?"
Martha glanced at Lydia, who nodded. The housekeeper opened the door and slipped out, leaving husband and wife alone in the too large room that was somehow supposed to become Lydia's home. Ethan had cleaned up, washed his face, changed his shirt. He looked younger without the trail dust, but also more formal, as if he'd put on armor along with the fresh clothes. "I imagine you have questions," he said. "That's an understatement." "Then ask them. I promised you an hour. We're here." Lydia turned from the window to face him fully. "What is this place?" "A timber operation. My family has holdings throughout these mountains. Contracts to harvest and process lumber for the railroad expansion, for mining operations, for the growing towns in the territory. This valley is the center of those operations." "Your family, you said you were a poor mountain man." "I never said that. You assumed it based on my clothes and the fact that I lived alone in the high country." His expression was carefully neutral. "I didn't correct you because I wanted to know if you'd marry me for myself, not for what I own." Anger flared hot in Lydia's chest. "So this was a test. You let me think I was trading myself for scraps. Let me agonize over marrying a stranger who might not even be able to feed me properly just to see if I'd pass some moral examination?" "No." Ethan's voice was sharp. "I let you make an informed choice. I offered you enough money to solve your problems regardless of whether you married me. I told you there would be a home, that you wouldn't lack for shelter or food. I never lied to you, Lydia. You just didn't tell me the whole truth. Would you have believed me if I had? If I'd ridden up to your family's cabin in fine clothes, told you I was wealthy, offered you a life of comfort, wouldn't you have thought I was insane? Or worse, that I was lying to take advantage of you?" Lydia wanted to argue, but couldn't. He was right. If a stranger had appeared claiming to be a wealthy timber baron looking for a wife, she would have laughed him out of the cabin or reached for her father's rifle. "So you deceived me instead," she said. "I gave you a choice based on what you could verify. A marriage contract, money to save your family, a promise of stability. Everything else—" He gestured around the room, toward the window and the valley beyond. "Everything else is extra. A benefit you didn't bargain for but get anyway. And what do you get out of this arrangement?" "Really?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, his jaw working as if he were chewing on words he didn't want to say. Finally, he moved to the window, standing beside her but looking out rather than at her. "My father built this operation from nothing," he said. "He was a good businessman but a hard man. When he died 3 years ago, he left everything to me, his only surviving child. Along with the timber holdings, I inherited a mess of complications. Partners who resent my authority, investors who think I'm too young or too soft, family members who want a piece of what they see as easy money. Well, what does that have to do with needing a wife? Appearances matter in business. A married man seems more stable, more committed, less likely to sell out or abandon the operation. And there are social obligations, dinners with investors, meetings with territorial officials, events where showing up alone raises questions." He glanced at her. "I could hire someone to play that role. In fact, several people suggested it. But I wanted something real. A partner, not an actress." "Someone from the mountains," Lydia said slowly. "Someone who wouldn't be impressed by wealth or intimidated by your business associates." "Someone who'd stood up to a debt collector without flinching," Ethan corrected. "Someone who chose survival over pride. Someone sharp enough to navigate complicated situations." "You barely know me. How could you know I was any of those things?" "I watched you for 3 weeks before I made the offer." The admission hung in the air between them. Lydia turned to stare at him. "You what?" "I needed to be sure, so I came to your settlement, stayed in the background, observed. I saw how you cared for your father, how you managed your mother's anxiety, how you handled the neighbor's pity and Samuel Garrett's contempt, how you kept that cabin running on nothing but determination and scraps." He met her eyes. "You were already managing an impossible situation with limited resources and no authority. That's exactly what I needed." Lydia didn't know whether to be flattered or furious. "You spied on me." "I did my research. There's a difference." "Not much of one from where I'm standing." Ethan's mouth quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Fair enough. I won't apologize for being careful, but I understand why it bothers you." "Bothers me?"
Lydia repeated. That's a gentle word for it. She moved away from the window, putting space between them.
What else haven't you told me? What other surprises am I going to discover? Several, probably. This is a complex operation with complex problems. But here's what I can promise. I won't lie to you directly. I may not volunteer every detail, but if you ask me a straight question, I'll give you a straight answer. Can you live with that? Lydia considered. It wasn't ideal, but it was more than many wives got. At least he was acknowledging the imbalance instead of pretending it didn't exist. I want that in writing, she said. An agreement. If we're doing this as a business arrangement, let's make it official. Now Ethan did smile, a real one that transformed his face. You really are sharp. Yes, all right. We'll draw up an agreement. What terms do you want? First, honesty when directly asked. Second, my own money, a regular allowance that's mine to keep or spend as I choose, no questions asked. Third, the freedom to write to my family and visit them when I can. Fourth, she paused, gathering courage. Fourth, the understanding that this marriage is a partnership, not ownership. You don't own me, Ethan. Not my choices, not my future, not my body. I'm here by contract, not conquest. Agreed. He said it without hesitation. Anything else? Not yet. I'm sure I'll think of more once I understand what I'm actually dealing with. I'm sure you will. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Lydia, I'm glad you came. I think we'll work well together. We'd better, she said. I just gave up everything I knew on that theory. After he left, Lydia sank onto the bed, suddenly exhausted. The mattress was soft, softer than anything she'd slept on in years. The room smelled of pine and beeswax polish. Through the window, she could hear voices from the compound, the sound of normal work resuming after the disruption of their arrival. She'd married a stranger to save her family. That much hadn't changed. But the stranger had turned out to be someone entirely different from what she'd expected. Wealthier, more powerful, more complicated. Whether that made her situation better or worse remained to be seen. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Martha entered carrying a tray. Thought you might want some tea and maybe some answers to questions you haven't thought to ask yet. I'm not sure I can handle any more revelations today. Nothing dramatic, dear, just practical information. Martha set the tray on the small table near the window and poured 2 cups. Milk? Sugar? Both, please. They sat together, the older woman moving with the comfortable authority of someone who'd run this household for years. Martha added generous amounts of both to Lydia's cup, as if sensing she needed the comfort. Mr. Crowe is a good man, Martha said, echoing her earlier assessment. But he's been alone a long time. His mother died when he was young. His father was, well, let's just say not the warmest of men. Ethan learned early to keep his cards close, trust carefully, and assume everyone wants something from him. That must be a lonely way to live. It is, but it's kept him safe. There are people who'd take advantage of him if they could, family members who think they deserve a share of the operation, business partners who want more than their contracts entitle them to, fortune hunters of every variety. Martha sipped her tea. When he said he was going down mountain to find a wife, I worried he'd come back with someone who saw dollar signs instead of a person. I'm glad I was wrong. You can't know that yet. You just met me. I know that you asked for terms instead of promises. I know you didn't dissolve into gratitude when you saw all this. Martha gestured around the room. And I know you're sitting here trying to figure out your next move instead of crying or celebrating. That tells me you're practical. And practical is exactly what this place needs. Lydia studied the older woman. Why are you telling me this? Because I've watched Mr. Crowe shoulder burdens that would break most men, and I'd like to see him have an ally instead of another weight to carry. You can be that ally, Mrs. Crowe, if you choose to be. Or you can just be a contractual obligation. The choice is yours. What if I choose to leave? Martha didn't look surprised by the question. Then you leave. Mr. Crowe would honor your contract, make sure you and your family were taken care of, and go back to managing everything alone. But I hope you'll stay. Not for his sake. For yours. There's a place for you here, if you want it. A real place, not just a role to play. After Martha left, Lydia spent the rest of the afternoon exploring her new quarters and trying to process everything that had happened.
The room had a connected bathing chamber with a large copper tub, shelves of fresh linens, and most surprising, a small library of books apparently left there for her convenience. She ran her fingers over the spines, novels, histories, practical guides to everything from animal husbandry to household management. Someone had thought about what she might need. Whether that someone was Ethan or Martha, it was a consideration she hadn't expected. As evening approached, another knock came. This time it was a young woman, perhaps Lydia's age, carrying a large pitcher of steaming water. "Thought you might like a hot bath, ma'am," the girl said shyly. "I'm Anne. I help Martha with the house." "Thank you, Anne, but you don't need to call me ma'am. Lydia is fine." Anne's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, I couldn't. You're Mrs. Crowe now. It wouldn't be proper." As Anne filled the tub with a series of trips from the kitchen, Lydia realized another layer of her new reality. She had status here, authority by virtue of marriage, whether she wanted it or not. These people would defer to her, look to her for direction, call her Mrs. Crowe, and mean it as respect. The responsibility of it settled on her shoulders like a physical weight. After her bath, Lydia dressed in one of the simpler dresses from her bag and went downstairs. She'd been avoiding the inevitable, but it was time to face the rest of this strange new household. The main room was occupied. Ethan sat at a large desk in the corner, papers spread before him, a ledger open under the lamplight. Samuel, the man from the workshop, occupied a chair near the fireplace, smoking a pipe. Martha was setting the table for dinner, and two other men Lydia hadn't met yet were playing cards at a smaller table. Everyone looked up when she entered. "Mrs. Crowe," Samuel said, rising. The card players followed suit. Even in the backcountry, some formalities held. "Please, don't let me interrupt," Lydia said. "You're not interrupting," Ethan said, standing as well. "You're joining. Come, let me make proper introductions." He guided her around the room. Samuel turned out to be the general foreman, responsible for coordinating all the timber operations. The card players were James and Robert, brothers who managed the actual logging crews. Over dinner, which Martha served with quiet efficiency, Lydia met two more workers who came in from the evening shift. Thomas, who handled the horses and equipment, and a silent man named Chen, who apparently managed the valley's water systems. The conversation flowed around her, mostly business talk about timber contracts, equipment repairs, and preparations for the coming winter. Lydia listened more than she spoke, trying to understand the operation's scale. "How much timber do you process in a year?" she asked during a lull. The table went quiet. The men glanced at Ethan, as if unsure whether they were allowed to answer. "It's all right," Ethan said. "She's entitled to know." He turned to Lydia. "Roughly 500,000 board feet in a good year. More if we get contracts for specialty lumber." Lydia had no frame of reference for that number, but the way the men nodded suggested it was substantial. "And the workers I saw today, they all live here?" "The core crew lives here year-round," Samuel explained. "About 20 people. During harvest season, we bring in another 20 or 30. They camp in the lower valley, work for wages, go home when the season ends." "Harvest season being?" "Late spring through early fall. Can't get timber out in winter. Roads are impassable." "So what happens in winter?" "Maintenance," Ethan said. "Equipment repair, planning for the next season, smaller projects. And this year," he paused, his expression shifting to something Lydia couldn't quite read. "This year, we have some other challenges to address." The men around the table shifted uncomfortably. James and Robert exchanged glances. Samuel suddenly became very interested in his dinner plate. "What kind of challenges?" Lydia asked. "Business challenges," Ethan said. "Nothing you need to worry about tonight." It was a dismissal, polite but firm. Lydia recognized the tactic. Her father had done the same thing when he didn't want to burden her mother with financial worries. The impulse was protective, maybe even kind, but it was also patronizing. She considered pushing, demanding to know what challenges might affect her new life. But she was exhausted, overwhelmed, and not ready for another fight. So she let it go, filing the evasion away as another question to revisit later. After dinner, the men dispersed to their own quarters. Most lived in a bunkhouse behind the main lodge. Martha showed Lydia where the kitchen was, how to work the stove, where supplies were kept. "You don't have to do any cooking if you don't want to," Martha said. "That's my job."
But some ladies like to have the option.
I'd like to help, Lydia said. I'm not used to being idle.
Martha smiled. You'll fit in just fine, Mrs. Crowe. That night, Lydia lay in her oversized bed in her oversized room, listening to unfamiliar sounds. The wind moving through the valley made a different sound than it had in the lower settlements. The building creaked and settled in its own rhythm. Somewhere outside, an owl called, the sound echoing off the surrounding mountains. She thought about her family, her father dying slowly in that dark cabin, her mother managing alone now. The money would have reached them by now. The debts would be paid. They'd have a reprieve at least. Time to figure out what came next. And she thought about Ethan, somewhere on the other side of this massive lodge, in his own suite with its own locked door. Her husband, who was really a stranger, a wealthy man who'd pretended to be poor, a timber baron who lived like a hermit, a mystery she'd married without understanding the depth of what she'd signed up for. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and full of dreams she couldn't quite remember when morning light woke her. The next few days established a rhythm. Lydia rose early, dressed, and came downstairs to find Martha already preparing breakfast for the work crews. She learned quickly that the household operated like a small town, meals at set times, tasks distributed among willing hands, everyone contributing in their own way. She explored the compound, mapping out the buildings and their purposes. The main barn housed the draft horses used for hauling timber. The second barn held supplies and served as a gathering point for the logging crews. The workshop where Samuel spent most of his time contained an impressive array of tools for carpentry, metalworking, and equipment repair. There was a smokehouse, a root cellar, a chicken coop, even a small dairy operation with 6 cows. The workers were polite but cautious around her, unsure how to treat the boss's unexpected wife. Lydia tried to be friendly without being intrusive, asking questions about their work, learning names and roles. Ethan was often absent, riding out early to check on logging operations in other parts of the valley, or locked in his office dealing with paperwork and correspondence. When they did interact, he was unfailingly courteous but distant, as if he'd already spent his quota of emotional energy on their previous conversation and had nothing left to spare. On the 4th day, a rider appeared from the direction of the pass, the first outsider Lydia had seen since their arrival. He was young, perhaps 20, dressed in the rough clothes of a cowhand but with a certain bearing that suggested better origins. Message for Mr. Crowe, he told Samuel, who'd intercepted him at the compound's edge. From Denver. Ethan emerged from his office moments later. He took the sealed envelope the rider offered, broke the wax, and read quickly. Lydia, watching from the porch, saw his jaw tighten, his shoulders square as if preparing for a blow. Tell them I'll be there in a week, Ethan said, and that my answer hasn't changed. The rider nodded and left. Ethan stood in the yard, the letter in his hand, his expression dark. Bad news? Lydia asked. He looked up, seeming to notice her for the first time. Complicated news. My uncle wants a meeting. He's been persistent about certain business matters. The challenges you mentioned at dinner, among others. He started to walk away, then stopped, turning back. Actually, Lydia, this concerns you too. You should probably know what you're walking into. He gestured for her to follow him into his office, a room she hadn't yet entered. It was smaller than she'd expected, lined with maps and ledgers, dominated by a heavy desk covered in correspondence. My father had 2 brothers, Ethan said, closing the door behind them. William died young. Marcus is still alive and very much interested in what he considers his rightful share of the family business. When my father left everything to me, Marcus contested the will. Lost, but he's never accepted the outcome. What does he want? Control, money, revenge for perceived slights going back decades. Ethan tossed the letter onto his desk. He's been making life difficult, spreading rumors about my competence, trying to undermine contracts, approaching investors with alternative proposals. Mostly I've been able to ignore him, but now he's demanding a formal meeting with all stakeholders, claiming I've been mismanaging the operation. Have you been? No, we're solvent, profitable, and growing, but Marcus has always been good at making accusations that require extensive effort to disprove. Ethan leaned against his desk, arms crossed. The meeting will be in Denver, at the main territorial office. There will be investors, other timber operators, probably a territorial official or two. It's designed to put me on trial in front of people whose opinions matter to our business. When? In 10 days, which means we leave in 3 days to allow for travel time. We? I need you there. He said it simply, as if it were obvious. A married man looks more stable than a bachelor, and if Marcus is going to question my judgment, I want to show I'm capable of building partnerships, not just giving orders. Lydia absorbed this. You want me to play the dutiful wife in front of your business rivals? I want you to be yourself, sharp, observant, unintimidated. That will be more convincing than any performance. And if I refuse, Ethan met her eyes, then I go alone and deal with Marcus myself. It's your choice, Lydia. I won't force you, but I'm asking, as your husband and your partner, for your help. It was the first time he'd explicitly called her his partner. The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Lydia thought about the contract they'd agreed to draw up, but hadn't yet formalized. About the life she was trying to build in this strange valley with this complicated man. About whether she wanted to be just an obligation or something more. All right, she said finally. I'll go. But we do this properly. You tell me everything I need to know about your uncle, your business, and what I'm walking into. No more surprises. Ethan's expression shifted, relief mixed with something that might have been respect. Deal. We start tomorrow morning. I'll teach you everything you need to know about the timber business, the stakeholders, and Marcus Crowe's particular brand of poison. Tomorrow morning, then. Lydia turned toward the door, then paused. Ethan, thank you for asking instead of ordering. You're my wife, not my employee. There's a difference. As she left his office, Lydia felt something shift between them. A tentative trust, fragile but real. They were still strangers in many ways, still navigating the complex agreement that had brought them together. But they were beginning to understand each other. And in the mountains, where winter was coming and enemies were gathering, understanding might be the most valuable commodity of all. The next morning, Lydia found herself in Ethan's office, surrounded by maps, ledgers, and contracts that represented an empire she'd never imagined existed. He'd pushed the desk against the wall and spread everything across a large table, creating what looked like a war room preparing for battle. This is the Crowe timber operation, Ethan said, indicating a massive map that showed not just the hidden valley, but dozens of other locations throughout the territory. Red marks indicated active logging sites. Blue marks showed processing facilities. Green marks represented property holdings. My father spent 30 years building this. Started with one logging contract in a borrowed wagon, ended with the largest independent timber operation between Denver and San Francisco. Lydia studied the map, her mind working to comprehend the scale. How many people work for you? Directly, about 200 across all sites. Indirectly, suppliers, transporters, mill workers. Probably another 300 depend on our contracts for their livelihood. He pointed to different marks on the map. We have 5 major operations besides this valley, each one managed by a foreman who reports to me monthly. And your uncle wants control of all this. Not control, a share. He thinks that because he's family, he deserves a percentage of everything. Never mind that he contributed nothing to building it, that my father specifically excluded him from the will for good reasons. What reasons? Ethan was quiet for a moment, his finger tracing one of the logging roads on the map. Marcus has a gambling problem, always has. My father bailed him out twice, once when Marcus was young and foolish, once when he should have known better. The second time, my father told him there wouldn't be a third. Marcus took that as rejection rather than reality. So this meeting, it's revenge? It's opportunity disguised as revenge. If Marcus can make me look incompetent in front of the investors, he might be able to force a reorganization. Get himself appointed as a partner or administrator. Once he has access to the finances, Ethan shook his head. He'd bleed the operation dry within 2 years, then blame me when everything collapsed. Lydia moved closer to the table, examining the contracts stacked there. Even without understanding all the legal language, she could see these represented substantial amounts of money. Who are the investors you're worried about? 3 main ones. Ethan pulled out a separate sheet with names and notes. Harrison Wells owns a railroad expansion company. He needs our timber for railroad ties and bridge construction. Conservative, cautious, values stability above all else. If he pulls his contracts, we lose 40% of our revenue. Next, Margaret Chen. Yes, a woman investor, rare but not unheard of in the territories. Her family owns mining operations that need timber for shoring up tunnels and building infrastructure. She's shrewd, doesn't suffer fools, and will make her own judgment regardless of what anyone else thinks. She sounds formidable. She is, which is why her opinion matters most. If she sides with Marcus, others will follow. If she sides with me, Marcus loses credibility. Ethan tapped the third name. Finally, there's Richard Blackwood. He represents a consortium of Eastern investors looking to expand into Western resources. New money, ambitious, willing to take risks, but also quick to abandon anything that looks unstable. Lydia absorbed all this, her mind already working through the dynamics. So Wells values stability, Chen values competence, and Blackwood values potential. Marcus will try to make you look unstable, incompetent, and limited in potential. Ethan looked at her with surprise. That's exactly right. How did you... I spent 5 years watching my father negotiate with buyers who wanted to pay half what our harvest was worth. You learn to read what people value and what threatens them. She studied the names again. What's your uncle's strategy likely to be? He'll question my age and experience, point out that I've only been running the operation for 3 years, suggest that my father's success came from his relationships and reputation, which don't transfer to me, imply that I'm making reckless decisions or alienating key partners. Are you? Making reckless decisions? No. Alienating partners? He smiled grimly. I've made changes my father never would have. Better wages for workers, safer equipment, more conservative logging practices that preserve the forest for future harvests. Some of the old guard don't like it. They think I'm putting principles before profit. Are you? I'm putting sustainability before short-term profit. There's a difference. Clear-cut logging destroys the land and eliminates future revenue. My approach takes longer but ensures we'll still have timber to harvest 20 years from now. He looked at her directly. My father built this operation, but he also exploited it. I'm trying to build something that lasts. Lydia felt something shift in her understanding of Ethan. He wasn't just a wealthy man playing at reform. He genuinely believed in what he was doing, even if it made his life harder. Your uncle will use that against you, she said. He'll call it weakness, naivety, poor business sense. I know, which is why I need evidence that my approach works. Numbers, contracts, testimonials from satisfied partners. He gestured to stacks of ledgers. I've spent the last 3 days compiling everything, but Marcus is good at making facts seem like excuses. He'll twist every number, question every decision, make me defend choices that shouldn't need defending. Then don't defend them. Present them as the obvious, correct choices they are. Make him explain why anyone would do it differently. Lydia pulled out a chair and sat, reaching for the nearest ledger. Show me the numbers. If I'm going to help you, I need to understand what we're actually dealing with. They spent the next 6 hours going through everything. Ethan walked her through profit margins, operating costs, contract terms, and the complex relationships between different parts of the business. Lydia's head spun with information, but she forced herself to focus, to understand not just the details, but the patterns beneath them. By afternoon, Martha brought them lunch, which they ate while continuing to work. By evening, Lydia could explain the timber operation as well as many of Ethan's own foremen. You're a fast study, Ethan said as they finally closed the last ledger. I'm motivated. This affects my life now, too. Lydia rubbed her tired eyes. One more question. Why did you really need a wife for this meeting? The stability argument makes sense, but there's something else, isn't there? Ethan hesitated, then nodded slowly. Marcus has been suggesting I'm unsuitable for marriage, that I'm too isolated, too strange, that no decent woman would want me. It's a small thing compared to his business arguments, but it reinforces the narrative that I'm somehow deficient. So bringing a wife proves him wrong. More than that, it shows I can form partnerships, that I'm capable of thinking beyond just myself and the business. He met her eyes. You being there says I'm building a future, not just managing a legacy. And if your investors don't like me, then I've misjudged badly, but I don't think I have.
The journey to Denver took 4 days by horseback and stagecoach.
They left the hidden valley in the gray light of pre-dawn, Samuel and 2 other men accompanying them as far as the nearest town where they could catch the stage. Lydia wore her best dress, the dark blue wool that had seen her through the wedding. Martha had cleaned and pressed it, and had added a proper traveling coat and hat that appeared mysteriously from the lodge's storage. Lydia suspected these had belonged to Ethan's mother, but he said nothing about it, and she didn't ask. The stage was crowded and uncomfortable, stuffed with passengers and their belongings. Lydia found herself wedged between Ethan and a large woman traveling with 3 children who couldn't sit still. The road was rough, the pace punishing, and by the second day every bone in Lydia's body ached. But she watched everything, the way Ethan interacted with strangers, polite but distant, giving away nothing personal, the way other passengers assessed them, making assumptions based on their clothes and bearing, the way conversations in the stage revealed information about business conditions, political tensions, social dynamics. "You're very quiet," Ethan observed during a stop to change horses. "I'm listening. You'd be surprised what people reveal when they think no one important is paying attention." He smiled. "I'm beginning to think I underestimated you." "Most people do. I've learned to use it as an advantage." Denver was larger than Lydia had imagined. A growing city of perhaps 30,000 people, with actual paved streets in the center, gas lamps being installed on main thoroughfares, and buildings that rose 3 and 4 stories high. The contrast to the isolated mountain valley was jarring. Ethan had reserved rooms at the Windsor Hotel, one of the finest establishments in the city. The clerk's eyebrows rose when Ethan signed the register, and Lydia noticed the subtle shift in the man's demeanor, from professional courtesy to something closer to deference. "Mr. Crowe, welcome back. We have your usual suite prepared, and for Mrs. Crowe," he glanced at Lydia with poorly concealed curiosity. "Shall I prepare an additional room?" "The suite will be sufficient," Ethan said smoothly. "My wife and I prefer adjoining quarters." In the suite, which consisted of a sitting room, 2 bedrooms, and a private bath with actual running water, Lydia finally confronted what she'd been avoiding thinking about. They'd maintained separate quarters in the valley, but here, for appearances, they needed to seem like an actual married couple. "The bedroom's locked from the inside," Ethan said, as if reading her thoughts. "And I'll be spending most evenings preparing for the meeting anyway. You'll have your privacy." "Thank you. Lydia." He waited until she looked at him. "I meant what I said in our agreement. This marriage is a partnership, not ownership. That doesn't change just because we're in a city instead of the mountains." She believed him, which was somehow more surprising than anything else that had happened. The meeting was scheduled for 2 days later, giving them time to prepare. Ethan took Lydia to a dressmaker's shop, where he insisted on purchasing proper city clothes for her. 3 dresses suitable for business and social occasions, with all the accompanying accessories that Lydia had never owned and barely knew how to wear. "Is this necessary?" she asked as the dressmaker pinned fabric around her. "It's armor," Ethan said. "Marcus will try to make you feel inferior, out of place. Don't give him the opportunity." The night before the meeting, Ethan received a visitor at the hotel, a man named Lawrence Porter, who turned out to be his attorney. They spent 3 hours going over strategy, anticipating Marcus's arguments, preparing responses. Lydia sat in the corner, supposedly reading but actually absorbing every word. She noticed that Ethan never mentioned her presence to Porter, never explained why his new wife was sitting in on confidential business discussions. The attorney seemed to accept it without question, as if a wife's involvement was perfectly natural. "The key is to keep Marcus from controlling the narrative," Porter said. "He'll want to put you on the defensive, make you explain yourself repeatedly. Don't let him. State your position clearly, back it with facts, and move on." "What about personal attacks?" Lydia asked. Both men turned to look at her. "I'm sorry," Porter said slowly. "I didn't catch—" "Personal attacks," Lydia repeated. "Mr. Crowe's uncle has apparently been questioning his suitability, his character, his personal life. Those aren't business arguments, but they're still attacks. How do we address them?" Porter glanced at Ethan, who nodded. "She's right. Marcus will make it personal." "Then don't address them at all," Lydia said. "Acknowledge that you hear him, then redirect to business. Every time he brings up something personal, respond with a business fact. It makes him look petty and unprofessional. Porter stared at her for a long moment, then smiled slowly. Mrs. Crowe, has anyone ever told you that you should have been an attorney? No, but I've negotiated with enough creditors and debt collectors to understand how to handle someone who's trying to make you emotional. After Porter left, Ethan poured 2 glasses of whiskey from the bottle on the sideboard. He handed one to Lydia. I'm not much of a drinker, she said. Neither am I, usually, but tonight I think we've earned it. He raised his glass. To tomorrow. Whatever it brings. Lydia touched her glass to his and took a small sip. The whiskey burned going down, but left a warmth that was oddly comforting. Are you worried? She asked. Yes, but less than I was before you were here. He settled into one of the suite's comfortable chairs. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you regret it, agreeing to marry me? Lydia considered the question honestly. She thought about the cabin she'd left behind, her dying father, her exhausted mother. She thought about the impossible debts and the life of poverty that had seemed inevitable. Then she thought about the hidden valley, the massive lodge, the complicated man who'd brought her there, the business empire she was now part of, the meeting tomorrow that could determine not just Ethan's future but hers as well. Ask me again in a week, she said finally, after we see how tomorrow goes. He laughed, a real laugh, not the bitter sound she'd heard before. Fair enough. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking their whiskey slowly, 2 people who'd been strangers a few weeks ago, preparing to face a battle together. The territorial business office was an imposing building of stone and glass, designed to project authority and permanence. Lydia felt her stomach clench as they climbed the steps, but she kept her face composed, her head high, one hand resting lightly on Ethan's arm. Inside, they were directed to a large conference room on the 2nd floor. The room was already partially filled when they arrived. Men in expensive suits talking in clusters, papers spread across a massive oak table, the air thick with cigar smoke and tension. Marcus Crowe was obvious even before Ethan identified him. He stood near the head of the table, holding court with several other men, his gestures expansive and confident. He was perhaps 50, with thinning hair and the soft build of someone who'd lived well but not carefully. His eyes, when they landed on Ethan, held a mixture of contempt and satisfaction. Nephew, Marcus said loudly. So good of you to finally join us. I was beginning to think you might have forgotten about our little meeting. We're 10 minutes early, Marcus, Ethan said evenly. Are you? Time has a way of slipping by in the mountains, I suppose. One loses track of civilized schedules. Marcus's gaze shifted to Lydia, his expression calculating. And who is this charming creature you've brought along? My wife, Lydia Crowe. Lydia, this is my uncle, Marcus Crowe. Lydia extended her hand with the poise Martha had helped her practice. Mr. Crowe, how lovely to meet Ethan's family. Marcus took her hand, holding it a moment too long. Wife? Well, this is news. I hadn't heard about any wedding. Rather sudden, wasn't it? We prefer to keep our personal affairs private, Ethan said. Private. Yes, I imagine you would. Marcus finally released Lydia's hand. Tell me, my dear, how long have you known my nephew? Long enough to know his character, Mr. Crowe, which is really what matters in a marriage, don't you think? Something flickered in Marcus's eyes, a recognition that Lydia wasn't going to be as easy to dismiss as he'd expected. Quite right. Character is everything. Before he could continue, a voice called from the doorway. Shall we begin? The speaker was a silver-haired man carrying a leather folder, the territorial official who would be moderating the meeting. Everyone moved to take seats around the table. Ethan and Lydia sat on one side, Marcus and his supporters on the other, with the 3 main investors positioned at the end like judges at a trial. Harrison Wells was exactly as Ethan had described, conservative in dress and manner, his face revealing nothing. Margaret Chen was the only woman in the room besides Lydia, elegant in a severe black dress that somehow made her look more powerful rather than less. Richard Blackwood was younger than the others, perhaps 40, with the restless energy of someone always looking for the next opportunity. Gentlemen, the official began, and ladies, we're here today at the request of Marcus Crowe to discuss concerns about the management of Crowe timber operations. Mr. Marcus Crowe, you called this meeting. Please state your concerns. Marcus stood, playing to the room. Thank you, Commissioner. I'll be brief. My brother built Crowe Timber from nothing into the finest operation in the territory. When he died 3 years ago, he left everything to his son, my nephew Ethan. At the time, I believed it was the right decision. Ethan had worked alongside his father, learned the business. But 3 years have passed, and I've watched with growing concern as inexperience and poor judgment have begun to undermine everything my brother built. That's a serious accusation, the commissioner said. Can you be more specific? Gladly. First, my nephew has implemented changes to logging practices that have reduced efficiency and profit margins. Second, he's alienated long-standing business partners with his idealistic approach to worker relations. Third, he's made no effort to expand the operation or pursue new opportunities, content to simply maintain the status quo. And finally, Marcus paused dramatically. He's proven himself incapable of the social and professional obligations that come with running a major business operation. I see. And what resolution are you proposing? Simple. I propose that I be appointed as a managing partner with authority over business decisions. Ethan can maintain his ownership stake, but the actual management would be handled by someone with more experience and better judgment. The room was silent. Ethan's face remained impassive, but Lydia could feel the tension in him like a coiled spring. The commissioner looked at Ethan. Mr. Crowe, would you like to respond to these accusations? I would. Ethan stood, and Lydia was struck by how different he seemed in this setting. Not the quiet mountain man, but someone with authority and presence. My uncle is correct that I've made changes to our logging practices. What he calls reduced efficiency, I call sustainability. We're harvesting less timber per acre, but leaving the land viable for future harvests. In 10 years, when other operations have exhausted their resources, we'll still be productive. Can you prove that? Richard Blackwood asked. I can show you the numbers. Ethan pulled out a ledger. Our profit margins are down 3% from my father's final year, but our costs are also down 7% due to reduced equipment damage and worker injuries. Net profit is actually up 4%. And we've extended our projected harvest timeline from 15 years to 40 years without reducing annual output. Margaret Chen leaned forward. That's an interesting approach. Do you have contracts that support these projections? I do. Including yours, Mrs. Chen. You'll notice we've delivered every contracted amount on schedule for the past 3 years, and our quality ratings have improved. Chen nodded slightly, making a note. Marcus jumped in. Quality and quantity are meaningless if you've damaged relationships with partners. Harrison, tell them about the dispute last year. Wells shifted uncomfortably. There was a disagreement about pricing structure. A disagreement my nephew refused to resolve reasonably, Marcus interjected. Actually, Wells said slowly, young Mr. Crowe was right. The pricing structure I initially proposed would have been advantageous to me, but unsustainable for the operation long term. He suggested an alternative that was fair to both parties. I accepted after reviewing the numbers. Marcus's jaw tightened. Nevertheless, the fact remains that my nephew has shown poor judgment in numerous ways, including, I might add, his sudden and unexplained marriage to a woman no one had ever heard of, from a background we know nothing about. Lydia felt every eye in the room turn to her. This was it. The personal attack they'd anticipated. Ethan started to speak, but Lydia put a hand on his arm, stopping him. She stood, meeting Marcus's gaze directly. Mr. Crowe, you're absolutely right that no one here knows my background, she said clearly. Allow me to enlighten you. I come from a struggling mountain settlement. My family lost everything to medical debt. When your nephew offered marriage, I accepted because I needed to save my family, and he needed a wife who understood hardship and survival. It was a business arrangement which I believe you of all people should appreciate. Marcus blinked, clearly not expecting her to be so direct. As for whether I'm suitable, Lydia continued, I've spent the past week learning every detail of the timber operation. I can discuss profit margins, logging techniques, contract negotiations, and resource management as competently as anyone in this room. Not because I have formal training, but because I understand that ignorance is a luxury, and this business affects my future as much as anyone's. She paused, letting her words settle. You question my background, Mr. Crowe. I question your motives. This meeting isn't about concern for the business. It's about resentment that your nephew succeeded where you never did. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus's face went red. How dare you? Mrs. Crowe raises an interesting point, Margaret Chen said calmly. Mr. Marcus Crowe, what exactly is your business experience? Beyond being related to the founder? Marcus sputtered. I've been involved in numerous ventures, all of which failed, Ethan said quietly. My father bailed you out twice, Uncle. The second time, he made it clear there wouldn't be a third. That's why he excluded you from the will, not out of spite, but because he knew you'd destroy everything he built. That's slander. It's documentation. Ethan produced another folder. My attorney has records of both bailouts, including the amounts and the circumstances. Would you like us to review them publicly? Marcus's confident demeanor cracked. He looked around the room, searching for support, but found only curious or skeptical faces. Mr. Wells, Ethan said, turning to the conservative investor, you value stability. I've provided 3 years of stable operations, consistent delivery, and sustainable practices. What more proof do you need? Wells considered. None, actually. I'm satisfied with our current arrangement. Mrs. Chen? The shrewd businesswoman smiled slightly. I'm satisfied as well. More than satisfied, I'm impressed, both with your business acumen and your choice of wife. Mr. Blackwood? The younger investor was watching Lydia more than Ethan. I came here expecting to hear about mismanagement. Instead, I've heard about innovation, sustainability, and long-term thinking. That's exactly what Eastern investors want to see in Western operations. He stood, offering Ethan his hand. Count me in for whatever expansion plans you're developing. Marcus looked around the room, realizing he'd lost. This is ridiculous. You're all being fooled by smooth words and attractive presentations. In 5 years, when the operation collapses, in 5 years, Ethan said, his voice hard now, we'll still be here, still profitable, still operating ethically. You, Uncle Marcus, will need to find some other way to fund your gambling debts. The words hit like a physical blow. Marcus's face went from red to white. You have no right. I have every right. This is my business, my responsibility, my future. Ethan looked at the commissioner. Is there anything else that needs to be addressed? The official glanced around the room. I think we've heard sufficient testimony. Mr. Marcus Crowe, your concerns have been noted and addressed. The investors have expressed satisfaction with current management. Unless you have evidence of actual malfeasance rather than philosophical disagreements, I see no grounds for the intervention you've requested. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, then turned and stalked from the room without another word. 2 of his supporters followed, looking embarrassed. After they left, the tension in the room dissolved into something more congenial. The investors came forward to congratulate Ethan, to express continued confidence, to discuss future contracts. Margaret Chen pulled Lydia aside. That was well done, she said quietly. Marcus expected you to be intimidated or incompetent. Instead, you turned his attack into evidence of his own inadequacy. I just told the truth, Lydia said. The truth, delivered at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right way. That's a skill, Mrs. Crowe, don't underestimate it. Chen handed her a calling card. I'd like to discuss something with you and your husband at some point. Not today. You've both earned a celebration, but soon. After everyone had left and they were finally alone in the conference room, Ethan turned to Lydia. You didn't have to do that, he said. Speak up, defend me. Yes, I did. We're partners, remember? That means fighting together, not watching from the sidelines. He studied her for a long moment, his expression complex. I misjudged you, he said finally. When I first came to your cabin, I thought I needed someone competent and practical. What I got was someone exceptional. Lydia felt warmth rise in her cheeks. Don't make me out to be more than I am. I just said what needed saying. That's exactly what exceptional people do. He offered his arm. Come on, I promised you a celebration, and I meant it. They left the building together, stepping out into Denver's afternoon sunlight. Lydia felt lighter than she had in weeks, as if some weight she'd been carrying had finally been lifted. They'd won. Against a man who should have known them better, against doubts and accusations, against the assumption that a poor mountain girl couldn't hold her own in a room full of wealthy businessmen. They'd won.
And as Ethan led her down the street toward a restaurant he promised had the finest food in Denver, Lydia realized something had fundamentally changed between them. They were no longer just two strangers bound by contract. They were becoming something else, a real partnership built on mutual respect and shared victories. The marriage might have started as a business arrangement, but it was becoming something more substantial, something that, given time and care, might actually turn into something worth keeping.
The celebration dinner was everything Ethan had promised. Fine food, excellent wine, a private table where they could finally breathe after the tension of the meeting. But halfway through the meal, a messenger arrived at their table with a cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. Ethan's expression darkened as he read the contents. "What is it?" Lydia asked. "An invitation from my Aunt Caroline, Marcus's wife." He passed the card across the table. "A dinner party tomorrow night at their Denver residence to properly welcome the new Mrs. Crowe to the family." Lydia studied the elegant script. "This is a trap." "Undoubtedly. Marcus lost today, but Caroline is in some ways more dangerous than he is. She has social connections he doesn't, friends in places that matter." Ethan drummed his fingers on the table. "She'll want to assess you herself, find weaknesses Marcus missed." "Should we decline? That would be seen as cowardice, or worse, as proof that you're unsuitable for society." He met her eyes. "I'm sorry, Lydia. I'd hoped we could return to the valley tomorrow and be done with all this. But if we don't go, Caroline will spread stories about my poor mountain wife who can't handle civilized company." "Then we go." Lydia kept her voice steadier than she felt. "You taught me the timber business in a week. How hard can one dinner party be?" Ethan's smile was grim. "You'd be surprised." They spent the next morning preparing. Ethan took Lydia to the finest shops in Denver, purchasing an evening gown that cost more than her father had earned in a year. The dress was deep green silk with black lace trim, elegant without being ostentatious. The dressmaker's assistant spent 2 hours teaching Lydia how to walk in it, how to sit without crushing the fabric, how to manage the small train. "Remember," Ethan said as they returned to the hotel, "Caroline will try to make you feel inferior. She'll ask questions designed to highlight your lack of education, your humble background, your inexperience with society. Don't let her rattle you." "What should I do instead?" "Be yourself. The woman who stood up to Marcus in that conference room didn't apologize for who she was. Don't start now." That evening, as Lydia dressed with the help of a maid the hotel had provided, she studied herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was almost unrecognizable. Elegant, polished, wearing a dress that cost a fortune and jewelry Ethan had insisted she borrow from his mother's collection. But underneath the silk and jewels, she was still the same person who'd scrubbed floors in that mountain cabin, who'd negotiated with debt collectors, who'd married a stranger to save her family. She touched the cameo at her throat, the one piece that had belonged to her own mother, added to the borrowed finery as a reminder of where she'd come from. "Don't forget," she whispered to her reflection. "Don't ever forget." The Crowe residence in Denver was a mansion in the truest sense. 3 stories of stone and glass in the fashionable part of the city, with a circular drive and gas lamps illuminating the entrance. Carriages lined the street, depositing guests and evening finery. "I thought this was supposed to be a small family dinner," Lydia said as their hired carriage joined the queue. "Caroline's definition of small is different from most people's." Ethan helped her down, his hand steady on her arm. "Stay close to me. If anyone asks you something you're not comfortable answering, deflect to me. I can handle myself." "I know you can, but you don't have to handle everything alone anymore." The entry hall was crowded with guests. Easily 40 people, all dressed in expensive clothes, all radiating the casual confidence of those who'd never worried about money or status. A string quartet played in the corner. Servants circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Caroline Crowe appeared almost immediately, gliding toward them with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was perhaps 45, still beautiful in a carefully maintained way, wearing diamonds that caught the gaslight and threw sparkles across the marble floor. "Ethan, darling," she said, kissing the air near his cheek, "how wonderful that you could come. And this must be your bride." Her gaze swept over Lydia, cataloging every detail. "My dear, what an interesting dress. Not quite Denver fashion, but it has a certain rustic charm. Thank you, Lydia said evenly. I prefer elegance to fashion. Trends change, but good taste endures. Caroline's smile froze for just a moment. How philosophical. You must tell me where you're from originally. I don't believe I caught the name of your family. The Hales, from a mountain settlement you've likely never heard of. How quaint. And your father? What does he do? He was a rancher. He's passed away since Ethan and I married. The lie came easily. Her father was dying, would probably be dead before she returned. It was easier than explaining the complicated truth. My condolences. Caroline's tone suggested anything but sympathy. And your mother? Manages the family property. Another half-truth. Her mother was managing what little remained, at least. Before Caroline could continue the interrogation, a woman in an elaborate purple gown approached. Caroline, you must introduce me to the mysterious bride everyone's talking about. Of course, Mrs. Lydia Crowe, this is Mrs. Helena Ashford. Her husband is a territorial judge. Helena looked Lydia up and down with frank curiosity. So you're the woman who married Ethan Crowe? We'd all begun to think he'd remain a bachelor forever. How did you manage it? I didn't manage anything. He asked, I accepted. It wasn't complicated. But surely there's a story. Was it love at first sight? A whirlwind romance? Lydia felt the eyes of a dozen nearby guests turn toward her, waiting for her answer. This was the trap. If she claimed it was a love match, they'd see through the lie. If she admitted it was practical, she'd seem mercenary. It was pragmatic, she said clearly. Ethan needed a wife who understood the realities of mountain life. I needed stability. We were honest about what we each wanted, and we made an agreement that satisfied us both. I find honesty far more romantic than pretty lies. The silence that followed was profound. Then Helena laughed, a genuine sound of surprised delight. Well, I'll be damned. An honest woman in Denver society. Caroline, wherever did you find her? Caroline's expression had gone rigid. Dinner is about to be served. Shall we move to the dining room? The dining room was even more opulent than the entry hall. A table that could seat 50, set with china and crystal that probably cost more than Lydia's entire settlement. Place cards directed each guest to their seat. Lydia found herself positioned between a banker named Mr. Whitmore and a woman introduced as Mrs. Patricia Newcomb, wife of a mining magnate. Ethan was seated at the far end of the table, too distant to help if things went wrong. The first course arrived, oysters on ice that Lydia had never seen before, let alone eaten. She watched the others, mimicking their movements, the particular fork they used. Mrs. Newcomb noticed. First time with oysters, dear? She asked, not unkindly. Yes. We didn't have access to seafood in the mountains. They're an acquired taste. Don't feel obligated if you don't like them. Lydia tried one. The texture was strange, slippery, but the taste was interesting, briny and fresh. It's different, but not unpleasant. That's a diplomatic answer. Mrs. Newcomb smiled. You're doing well, considering. These dinners are designed to make outsiders feel inadequate. Caroline's specialty. I appreciate the warning. Consider it insider information. My own first Denver dinner was a disaster. I used the wrong fork for every course and spilled wine on the hostess. But I learned. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. The secret is that most of these people are just as uncertain as you are. They're just better at hiding it. The conversation flowed around the table, covering topics Lydia knew little about. The latest fashions from Paris, upcoming social events, gossip about people she'd never met. She listened more than she spoke, learning the rhythms, the unspoken rules. Then Mr. Whitmore turned to her. Mrs. Crowe, I understand you're from the mountains. Tell me, what do you think of Denver? It must seem quite overwhelming after such a rustic upbringing. The question was designed to make her seem provincial, out of place. Lydia recognized the tactic. It was the same one Samuel Garrett had used when trying to intimidate her family. Denver is impressive, she said. The growth is remarkable. But I'd be cautious about calling mountain life rustic. The skills required to survive in isolation, resource management, weather prediction, emergency medicine, construction, animal husbandry, those aren't simple country skills. their sophisticated knowledge that most city dwellers would find invaluable if they ever had to fend for themselves. Are you suggesting city life makes people less capable? Mr. Whitmore's tone was offended. I'm suggesting different environments require different capabilities. You're likely excellent at navigating banks and businesses. I'm excellent at surviving when there's no bank or business to navigate. Neither skill set is superior. They're just suited to different challenges. Several people at the table were nodding. Mrs. Newcomb was smiling openly. But Caroline wasn't finished. As the main course arrived, roast duck with elaborate sauce, she addressed Lydia from the head of the table, her voice carrying to everyone present. My dear, I'm curious. How much education did you receive before marrying my nephew? I assume mountain settlements have limited access to proper schooling. The table fell silent. This was the real attack, questioning Lydia's intelligence, her fitness to be Ethan's wife in a world where education and breeding mattered. Lydia set down her fork carefully, meeting Caroline's gaze. I had 6 years of formal schooling before the school closed due to lack of funding. After that, my father taught me from his own books: history, literature, mathematics, basic sciences. My mother taught me practical skills: accounting, contract law, negotiation. I'm not formally educated in the way you mean, Mrs. Crowe, but I can read, write, calculate, and think critically, which, respectfully, is more than some formally educated people manage to accomplish. But surely you must feel overwhelmed by the business aspects of Ethan's work, Caroline pressed. The contracts, the financial matters, the strategic decisions, those require years of training and experience. Do they? I learned the entire timber operation in a week. Profit margins, contract terms, resource management, labor relations. If it only took me a week to understand, how complicated could it really be? Someone down the table coughed to cover a laugh. Caroline's face had gone pink. Understanding and managing are very different things, she said sharply. True. But I didn't claim to be managing anything. Ethan manages the operation. I support him, offer perspective, and handle matters he doesn't have time for. It's called partnership, Mrs. Crowe. I believe it's how most successful marriages function. The woman next to Caroline, someone Lydia hadn't been introduced to, spoke up. Actually, that sounds remarkably sensible. Most of the marriages I know operate on the husband making decisions and the wife nodding along. Your approach seems far more practical. Caroline looked furious, but she couldn't attack a guest for agreeing with Lydia. She changed tactics, turning to another guest and deliberately excluding Lydia from the conversation. Mrs. Newcomb leaned close again. You just made an enemy. Caroline doesn't forget being embarrassed at her own dinner table. She was already my enemy, Lydia whispered back. At least now she knows I won't be an easy target. After dinner, the party moved to the drawing room for coffee and cordials. The men gathered at one end, discussing business. The women clustered at the other, discussing whatever wealthy women discussed when men weren't listening. Lydia found herself surrounded by curious women, all asking questions, some genuinely interested, others clearly looking for ammunition to use in future gossip. Is it true you married Ethan after knowing him less than a day? One woman asked. It's true we married quickly, but we were honest about what we each needed. I find that more important than a long courtship built on illusions. But how can you possibly love someone you barely know? I never claimed to love him. Love, if it comes, takes time and shared experience. Right now we're building respect and partnership. That's a better foundation than infatuation, don't you think? Another woman, older and sharp-eyed, studied Lydia closely. You're remarkably honest, Mrs. Crowe. Most young brides pretend to be madly in love, even when everyone knows it's a practical arrangement. I was raised to believe lies, even polite ones, create more problems than they solve. If people think less of me for being honest about my marriage, that tells me more about them than it does about me. The older woman smiled. I like you. You remind me of myself 40 years ago, before society taught me to soften every truth with pretty words. She extended her hand. I'm Margaret Chen. We met briefly at the territorial meeting. Lydia's eyes widened. Mrs. Chen, I didn't realize that I'd be at Caroline's dinner party? She and I have been acquaintances for years, though not friends. I came tonight specifically to meet you properly. Your performance at the meeting was impressive, but I wanted to see how you handled social warfare and your assessment. You're rough around the edges, but you have good instincts. You don't apologize for who you are, and you don't let others define your worth. Those qualities will serve you well." Margaret glanced around the room. "Most of these women would fall apart if they had to survive what you've survived. They mistake privilege for strength. You have actual strength." "Thank you. That means more than you probably know." "I suspect I know exactly how much it means." Margaret lowered her voice. "I mentioned at the meeting that I wanted to discuss something with you and Ethan. The offer stands. Come to my office tomorrow before you return to the mountains. I have a proposition that might interest you both." Before Lydia could respond, Caroline appeared at her elbow. "Mrs. Chen, I'm so glad you could attend. Are you enjoying yourself?" "Very much. Your new niece is delightful. I can see why Ethan married her." Caroline's smile was glacial. "How wonderful. Though I must say I'm surprised Ethan didn't choose someone from his own social circle, someone with more appropriate background." "Appropriate for what?" Margaret asked mildly. "Ethan doesn't need a society ornament. He needs a partner who can handle the realities of running a frontier business. Mrs. Crowe seems ideally suited for that role." "Of course you would think so, coming from trade yourself," Caroline began, then seemed to realize her mistake. Margaret's expression didn't change, but her eyes went cold. "Yes, I come from trade. As does your nephew, as do most successful people in the territories. The only difference is that I don't pretend my money makes me better than those who work for a living." She turned to Lydia. "My dear, it's been a pleasure. I look forward to our meeting tomorrow. Shall we say 10 o'clock? "I'll be there," Lydia said. Margaret swept away, leaving Caroline seething. Several other women had overheard the exchange, and Lydia could see them filing away this information for future use. Caroline Crowe had just been publicly rebuked by one of the most influential women in Denver society. The dinner party couldn't end soon enough. When Ethan finally collected Lydia and they escaped to their hired carriage, she felt exhausted in a way that physical labor had never made her feel. "How bad was it?" Ethan asked. "Caroline tried to make me feel stupid, inferior, and out of place. I refused to cooperate. I don't think she appreciated it. I saw Margaret Chen talking to you. What did she want?" "To meet tomorrow. She has a proposition." Lydia leaned her head back against the carriage seat. "Ethan, is every social event in your world like this? People attacking each other with polite words and searching for weaknesses?" "The ones involving my family, yes. It's exhausting, isn't it?" "Completely. I'd rather negotiate with 10 debt collectors than face another dinner party like that." He smiled. "You did well, though. I watched Caroline's face when you refused to be intimidated. It was the first time I've seen her actually flustered." Mrs. Chen helped. She was kind in a way I didn't expect. Margaret doesn't waste kindness on people she doesn't respect. If she's taken an interest in you, that's significant. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Lydia, I know this isn't what you signed up for. Business meetings and hostile dinner parties weren't part of our agreement. They are now. We're in this together, remember? That means facing whatever comes, whether it's Marcus in a conference room or Caroline in a dining room." He reached across the carriage and took her hand, the first time he'd initiated physical contact beyond the necessary courtesies. His grip was warm, solid, real. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for standing with me, for not running when you saw how complicated my life actually is." "Where would I run to? Besides, I'm too stubborn to let Caroline Crowe win." They rode the rest of the way to the hotel in comfortable silence, still holding hands in the darkness of the carriage. Something had shifted between them again, another layer of partnership settling into place, built on shared battles and mutual respect. Margaret Chen's office was nothing like Lydia expected. Instead of the elaborate furnishings and expensive decor she'd seen at Caroline's mansion, Margaret's space was functional and efficient. A large desk covered in papers, filing cabinets lining the walls, maps of mining operations spread across a work table. "I'm not interested in impressing people with expensive furniture," Margaret said, noticing Lydia's surprise. "I'd rather spend money on things that actually generate returns." She gestured for them to sit, then poured tea from a simple pot on a side table. Let me be direct. I was impressed by both of you at the territorial meeting. More importantly, I was impressed by how you work together. Most married couples in business either operate completely separately or one dominates the other. You two actually collaborate.
Thank you, Ethan said, though I'm not sure where this is leading. I have mining operations throughout the territory.
Good operations, profitable operations. But I'm facing a problem similar to what you described with your timber business. Short-term thinking versus long-term sustainability. My foremen want to extract as much as possible as quickly as possible. I want to extract efficiently while preserving the mines for future production. That's a management challenge, Ethan said. What does it have to do with us? I need advisors who understand sustainable resource extraction, people who've proven they can balance profitability with preservation, people who aren't afraid to make unpopular decisions if they're the right decisions. Margaret set down her teacup. I want to hire you both as consultants. You'd review my operations, recommend changes, and help implement new practices. The pay would be substantial, and it would give you both experience beyond timber operations. Lydia glanced at Ethan, trying to read his reaction. He looked intrigued, but cautious. Why both of us? He asked. I have the technical expertise, but Lydia has a different perspective, Margaret interrupted. Mr. Crowe, you're skilled at the business aspects, but Mrs. Crowe has something equally valuable. She understands survival. When resources are scarce, when margins are thin, when one bad decision means disaster. That's the mentality mining operations need. Not excess and extraction, but careful management and strategic thinking. I've never worked in mining, Lydia said. You'll learn, just like you learned the timber business in a week. Margaret smiled. Mrs. Crowe, I don't offer opportunities like this lightly. I see potential in you that goes beyond being Ethan's wife. You have intelligence, courage, and the ability to stand up to powerful people without backing down. Those qualities are rare and valuable. Lydia felt something warm unfold in her chest. Recognition, validation, the sense that someone saw her as more than just a poor mountain girl who'd married well. We'd need to discuss terms, Ethan said slowly. Timeline, compensation, how it would work with our own operations. Of course, I'm not expecting an answer today. Think about it. Talk it over. Send me a proposal. Margaret stood, offering her hand. But I hope you'll accept. The territories need more people who think long-term instead of just grabbing whatever they can in the moment. As they left her office, Lydia felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet again. 2 weeks ago, she'd been desperate and powerless, accepting marriage to a stranger as her only option. Now she had a wealthy timber baron for a husband, had stood up to his enemies, and was being offered work that recognized her abilities independent of her marriage. What do you think? Ethan asked as they walked back toward the hotel. I think I'm terrified and excited in equal measure. I think this could be an incredible opportunity. I think I have no idea if I'm actually capable of what she's asking. You are. If I had any doubt about that, I'd say so. You really believe that? I watched you learn an entire business in a week, then defend it in front of hostile investors. I watched you handle Caroline's attacks without flinching. Yes, Lydia, I believe you're capable of this. The question is whether you believe it. She thought about the girl she'd been a month ago, powerless, desperate, resigned to a life of poverty and struggle. Then she thought about the woman she was becoming, someone who could hold her own in any situation, who could learn and adapt and fight back when challenged. I want to try, she said finally. I want to see what I can become if I stop limiting myself to what I think I should be. Ethan smiled. A real smile, warm and genuine. Good, because I'd like to take Margaret's offer, and I'd like to do it as actual partners, not just you supporting my work. Actual partners, Lydia repeated. Equals. Equals. They returned to the valley 3 days later, laden with new contracts, new possibilities, and a new understanding of what their partnership could become. The mountain air felt cleaner after Denver's smoke and crowds, the hidden valley more welcoming after the hostile social battlefield they'd navigated. Martha met them at the lodge with hot coffee and a warm meal, and Lydia realized with surprise that it felt like coming home. That evening, as the household settled into its familiar rhythms, Ethan found Lydia on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Thinking about Denver? He asked. Thinking about how much has changed. A month ago, I couldn't have imagined any of this. Now I can't imagine going back to who I was. You don't have to. That's the gift of transformation. You get to keep the good parts of who you were while becoming something more. She looked at him, this complicated man who'd offered her an escape that had turned into an opportunity for something greater. Thank you for seeing potential in me when I didn't see it myself. Thank you for proving me right. He hesitated, then added, Lydia, I know this started as a business arrangement, but I'd like it to become something more, not rushed, not forced, just more. If you're willing. Lydia's heart beat faster. She thought about their partnership, their shared victories, the growing respect and trust between them. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was the foundation love could build on. I'm willing, she said. Let's see what we can build together. The mountains stood silent around them, holding secrets and possibilities in equal measure. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, and the valley answered with the sounds of evening, workers finishing their day, smoke rising from chimneys, the ordinary magic of people building lives in an extraordinary place. Lydia had come to these mountains as a desperate woman with no choices. She was becoming something else entirely, a partner, a businesswoman, someone who could shape her own future instead of just surviving it. The real test wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more enemies, more moments when she'd have to prove her worth. But for the first time in her life, Lydia Crowe believed she was capable of meeting whatever came next. And that belief, more than anything else, made all the difference. Winter arrived in the hidden valley with a fury that surprised even the longtime residents. The first major snow came in late October, 3 weeks earlier than usual, blanketing the compound in 2 feet of white silence. Lydia woke to a transformed world, every building outlined in snow, icicles hanging from the eaves like crystal daggers, the entire valley sealed off from the outside world until spring. Thaws reopened the passes. She stood at her bedroom window, coffee warming her hands, watching workers dig paths between buildings. In the months since their return from Denver, the valley had become genuinely home in ways she hadn't expected. She knew every building now, every worker's name, the rhythms of the operation as intimately as she'd once known her family's small farm. A knock came at the connecting door between her suite and Ethan's, the door that had remained locked since their arrival, but had recently begun opening more often as their partnership deepened into something warmer. "Come in," she called. Ethan entered, already dressed for the day, carrying a telegram. His expression was serious, but not alarmed. "News from your mother," he said, handing her the paper. Lydia's hands trembled as she unfolded it. The message was brief, written in the telegraph operator's shorthand. Father passed peacefully. Stop debts cleared. Stop. Thank you. Thank you. Stop. Letter following. Stop. Mother. She read it twice, feeling the strange mix of grief and relief that comes when long-anticipated bad news finally arrives. Her father was gone. The man who'd taught her to read, to ride, to survive, reduced to a dozen words on a piece of paper. "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. "I know you expected it, but that doesn't make it easier." "No, it doesn't." Lydia set the telegram on her dresser, next to the cameo that had been her mother's. But at least he didn't die under the weight of those debts. At least he had that peace. "Do you want to go to her? The passes are closed, but we could get through with enough effort." "No." Lydia was surprised by her own certainty. "My father is gone. My presence won't change that. And my mother has the money to manage, to hire help, to survive the winter. Come spring, I'll visit. Bring her here if she's willing, but right now, I'm needed here." Ethan studied her face. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. My father would understand. He always valued practical choices over sentimental ones." What she didn't say, what she was only beginning to acknowledge even to herself, was that the hidden valley had become more home than the cabin she'd left behind. The grief she felt was real, but so was her commitment to the life she was building here. The letter her mother had mentioned arrived 2 weeks later, carried by a hardy mail courier who'd braved the mountain passes before they completely closed. Margaret Hales' handwriting was shaky, but her words were clear. "Dearest Lydia, your father passed in his sleep, peacefully as could be hoped. He spoke of you often in those final days. Said he was proud of the choice you made, proud of the strength you showed. The money you sent has been a blessing beyond measure. The debts are paid, the cabin is secure for now, and I have enough to last the winter with some to spare. Don't grieve overmuch for him, child. He was ready to go, tired of fighting. Be well. Build your new life. He would want that for you. Your loving mother. Lydia read the letter alone in her room, letting herself cry for the first time since receiving the telegram. She cried for her father, for the life they'd lost, for the girl she'd been who'd stood at that cabin window counting fence posts and wondering if hope was worth the effort. Then she dried her eyes, folded the letter carefully, and went downstairs to work. The winter months brought unexpected challenges. With the passes closed and the logging operations shut down until spring, the compound turned inward, becoming a self-contained community. 23 people living in close quarters with nothing but time and each other for company. Lydia discovered she had a talent for managing these social dynamics. She organized communal dinners where everyone contributed, established a lending library from the books in the lodge, and created work rotations that kept people busy without exhausting them. She settled disputes between workers, managed the food stores, and somehow kept morale high, even when cabin fever threatened to turn minor disagreements into major conflicts. "You're good at this," Martha observed one evening as they inventoried the root cellar. "Managing people, I mean. It's a gift." "Is it? It just seems like common sense. Keep people fed, occupied, and feeling valued. The rest takes care of itself." "Common sense isn't common, dear. Most people with authority either try to control everything or ignore everything. You found the balance." Ethan noticed too. He'd begun including her in decisions that had nothing to do with their work for Margaret Chen, equipment purchases, hiring decisions, strategic planning for the next logging season. Their evening meetings in his office became routine, the two of them reviewing ledgers and discussing plans like the partners they'd claimed to be. But it was more than partnership now, though neither of them had explicitly acknowledged it. There were small touches, his hand on her back when they walked, her fingers brushing his when they passed papers across the desk. Conversations that lasted late into the night, ranging far beyond business into philosophy, memories, dreams for the future. "Tell me about your mother," Lydia said one evening when the work was done and they'd settled into the comfortable chairs by his office fireplace. "She died when I was 12. Pneumonia, complicated by a weak heart." Ethan stared into the flames. "She was kind, I remember that. Kinder than my father deserved. She used to read to me, poetry, novels, anything she could find. My father thought it was frivolous, but she did it anyway." "You miss her." "I miss who I was when she was alive. After she died, my father threw himself into the business, and I became just another asset to manage. He taught me everything about timber operations, nothing about being human." "Is that why you live up here, away from everything?" "Partly. After he died, I inherited an empire I never asked for and social obligations I couldn't stand. The valley became refuge. A place where I could build something on my own terms." He looked at her. "Until I realized I was just hiding, that's when I went looking for you." "You weren't hiding, you were preparing. There's a difference." "Maybe. Or maybe you're generous in your interpretations." "I've been called many things, Ethan Crowe. Generous isn't usually one of them." He smiled, that genuine expression she was seeing more often now. "Then I'm fortunate to see a side of you others miss." The moment stretched between them, warm and comfortable. Lydia felt something shift in her chest, not the desperate need that drove people to foolish choices, but something deeper and more lasting. Respect had grown into trust. Trust was becoming affection. And affection was slowly, carefully, transforming into something that might eventually be called love. "Ethan," she said softly, "this marriage, it's not what either of us expected, is it?" "No, it's better." He reached across the small space between their chairs and took her hand. "I thought I was getting a practical arrangement. I got a partner, a friend, someone who challenges me to be better than I thought I could be. And I thought I was trading one hard life for another. Instead, I found purpose, opportunity, and—" She hesitated, then said it. "And someone worth building a life with." He stood, drawing her up with him, and for the first time since their wedding, he kissed her.
Not a formal kiss for show or obligation, but something real and tender, full of promise and possibility. When they parted, Lydia was breathless. That was overdue, Ethan finished. I've been wanting to do that for weeks. Then why didn't you? Because I wanted you to be sure. To choose this, choose me, without pressure or obligation. I choose you, Lydia said. I choose this. Not because I have to, but because I want to. They stood together by the fire, holding each other, two people who'd started as strangers and were becoming something infinitely more precious. Outside, the winter wind howled through the mountains, but inside the lodge, in the warm circle of firelight and new understanding, Lydia felt safer and more certain than she'd ever felt in her life. Spring came slowly to the valley, the snow melting in fits and starts, revealing a landscape hungry for warmth and growth. With the thaw came challenges, avalanches that blocked roads, flooding from snowmelt, equipment damage from the harsh winter. But it also brought opportunity. Margaret Chen's first visit to the valley coincided with the spring thaw. She arrived with 2 assistants and enough surveying equipment to outfit an expedition, ready to begin the consulting work she'd proposed in Denver. Impressive operation, she said, surveying the compound from the lodge's porch. I can see why you prefer it up here. There's an honesty to it that's missing in the city. Over the next week, Margaret, Ethan, and Lydia toured the timber operations, examining practices and discussing applications to mining. Lydia found herself contributing more than she'd expected, seeing connections between resource extraction and sustainable management that came from her unique perspective. Here's what I don't understand, she said as they examined a recently logged section. You're both focused on extracting maximum value from each site, but what about the value of the land itself? If you destroy the forest or the mountain in extraction, you've eliminated future value entirely. That's the sustainability argument, Ethan said. But investors want returns now, not in 20 years. Then show them the cost of not thinking long term. What does it cost to establish a new logging site when you've exhausted the current one? What's the value of reliable, consistent production versus boom and bust cycles? Lydia gestured to the managed forest around them. This section will be harvestable again in 15 years. A clear-cut section won't be productive for 50 years or more. That's the real cost. Opportunity lost. Margaret was taking notes. That's an argument my foremen haven't made. They talk about sustainability in moral terms, being good stewards, respecting the land, but you're framing it as pure economics. Investors understand economics. Because it is economics. Morality might motivate some people, but money motivates everyone. If you can prove that sustainable practices are more profitable long-term, you remove the ethical debate entirely. You should write this up, Margaret said, a formal proposal I can present to my board. They need to hear this perspective. Lydia looked at Ethan, who nodded encouragement. All right, I'll write it. The proposal took her 3 weeks. She worked on it late into the evenings, researching, calculating, building arguments that were airtight and compelling. Ethan reviewed drafts, offering suggestions but never undermining her work. Martha brought her endless cups of coffee and made sure she ate. The entire household seemed invested in her success. When she finally presented the finished document to Margaret, the older woman read it slowly, making marks and notes throughout. This is excellent work, Margaret said finally. Professional quality. You've made an argument even the most skeptical investor couldn't dismiss. Where did you learn to write like this? I didn't. I just wrote what made sense to me, then revised until it was clear. Natural talent, then. Even more impressive. Margaret closed the folder. Mrs. Crowe, Lydia, I'd like to offer you a permanent position as a consultant to my mining operations, independent of your husband's work. This would be your own contract, your own income, your own professional identity. Lydia felt her breath catch. You're serious. Completely. I need people who can think differently, who aren't trapped by conventional wisdom. You've proven you can do that. The question is whether you want to. Lydia looked at Ethan, who was smiling. It's your choice, he said, but I think you should take it. You've earned this. Then yes, Lydia said, turning back to Margaret. Yes, I'll take the position. They shook hands, sealing an agreement that transformed Lydia from a timber baron's wife into a professional consultant in her own right. It was a moment of crystallization, the final step in her journey from powerless to powerful, from circumstance-driven to self-determined. News from Denver arrived in early summer, carried by the same young courier who'd delivered the message about Marcus's meeting. This time, the envelope bore Caroline Crowe's seal. Ethan opened it with obvious reluctance. As he read, his expression darkened, then shifted to something like grim satisfaction. "What is it?" Lydia asked. "Marcus is being investigated for fraud. Apparently, he's been running a scheme involving fake mining claims, selling worthless property to Eastern investors for inflated prices. Caroline is trying to distance the family from the scandal." He handed her the letter. "She wants us to issue a public statement condemning his actions, making it clear he has no connection to our business." Lydia scanned the letter. Caroline's desperation was evident in every line, the careful phrasing, the subtle threats, the assumption that family loyalty would trump personal animosity. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Exactly what she's asking. "Not because I owe Caroline anything, but because it's true. Marcus has no connection to our business, and I want that on record." Ethan's smile was sharp. "Though I won't do it in the groveling tone she's expecting. We'll issue a simple, factual statement. No editorializing, no family drama, just facts." "That will infuriate her." "Good. She tried to destroy you at that dinner party. I haven't forgotten." They drafted the statement together, keeping it brief and professional. Within days, it appeared in the Denver papers, alongside stories about Marcus's arrest and the scandal surrounding his fraudulent schemes. Caroline's social standing took a significant hit, guilt by association with a criminal family member. Lydia felt no satisfaction in Caroline's downfall, but she did feel a sense of justice. The woman who'd tried to make her feel inferior and worthless was now facing her own reckoning. Sometimes karma required no assistance. By midsummer, the valley was thriving. The logging operations were in full swing, producing timber at sustainable rates that still met all their contracts. Margaret Chen's consulting work had expanded, with Lydia traveling to mining sites and writing reports that were changing how the entire industry approached resource extraction. The household ran smoothly, managed by Martha with Lydia's organizational support, and Lydia's mother had agreed to visit. Margaret Hale arrived on a bright July afternoon, traveling with a neighbor who'd been coming to Denver for supplies. She looked older than Lydia remembered, more fragile, more worn, but her eyes were bright with curiosity as she took in the hidden valley. "Lydia," she breathed as she dismounted. "You didn't tell me it was like this. I thought well, I don't know what I thought, but not this." "I wasn't sure you'd believe me if I tried to explain," Lydia said, embracing her mother. "It's better to see it yourself." Over the next 2 weeks, Margaret Hale absorbed everything: the size of the operation, the quality of the lodge, the respect people showed Lydia, the easy partnership between Lydia and Ethan. Mother and daughter spent long evenings talking, filling in the gaps that letters couldn't bridge. "Your father would be proud," Margaret said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "Not because you married wealth. He'd have seen through that in a moment, but because you took an impossible situation and turned it into something remarkable. That takes courage and intelligence in equal measure." "I had good teachers," Lydia said. "Yes, but you had to find the strength to use those lessons." "That was all you." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Are you happy, Lydia? Really happy?" Lydia considered the question honestly. She thought about the life she'd left behind, the poverty, the desperation, the constant worry. Then she thought about her life now. Challenging work, true partnership, a home she'd helped build, opportunities she'd never dreamed possible. "I'm happy," she said. "Not because everything is perfect or easy, but because I'm building something meaningful with someone I respect and care for. That's more than most people ever get." "And you love him? Your Ethan?" "I do. Not the way songs and stories describe it, no lightning bolts or instant passion, but something deeper. I love who he is, who we are together, what we're building. That's real love, I think. The kind that lasts." Margaret smiled, reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand. "Then I'm content. You found what I had with your father, a partnership built on respect that grew into love. That's the best foundation there is." The summer also brought expansion plans. With the business stable and profitable, Ethan and Lydia began discussing ways to grow while maintaining their commitment to sustainability. We could establish a training program, Lydia suggested during one of their evening planning sessions. Teach other operations our methods, charge for the consulting, create a revenue stream that doesn't depend on timber production. Like what you're doing for Margaret, but formalized. Exactly. We have knowledge and expertise that other operations need. Why not monetize it while spreading practices that benefit everyone? Ethan was already sketching out ideas. We'd need to develop a curriculum, create written materials, establish credibility beyond our own operation. I could write the curriculum. Margaret's consulting work has given me experience translating practical knowledge into teachable content, and our credibility is built. We have the numbers to prove our methods work. They worked late into the night, excitement building as the vision took shape. It was more than just a business expansion. It was a chance to influence the entire industry, to prove that success didn't require exploitation, that thinking long-term benefited everyone. By autumn, they'd established the Crowe Institute for Sustainable Resource Management, an ambitious name for what started as a small training program, but one that captured their vision. The first class consisted of 6 foremen from various timber and mining operations, brought to the valley for intensive 2-week training. Lydia found herself teaching alongside Ethan and discovered she had a gift for it. She could explain complex concepts in clear terms, could connect theoretical knowledge to practical application, could inspire people to think differently about their work. "You're a natural teacher," one of the students, a grizzled foreman named Tom Walsh, told her after a particularly intense session on resource assessment. "I've been in this business 30 years, and I never thought about it the way you describe. Makes sense, though. Real sense." The success of the first class led to a second, then a third. Word spread through the industry. The Crowe Institute became known as the place to learn cutting-edge sustainable practices. Revenue from the training program grew steadily, diversifying their income and increasing their influence. Marcus's fraud trial concluded in October, resulting in a 5-year prison sentence and complete financial ruin. Caroline Crowe left Denver for San Francisco, her social standing destroyed, her marriage to Marcus apparently dissolved. The family that had tried to undermine Ethan and destroy Lydia had destroyed itself instead. Ethan received one final letter from Caroline before she left the territory. It was brief and bitter. "You've won, nephew. I hope you're satisfied. Your poor mountain wife proved more formidable than any of us expected. Perhaps that's justice of a sort." "She still doesn't understand," Lydia said, reading over Ethan's shoulder. "It was never about winning or losing. It was about building something real." "Some people only think in terms of competition and conquest," Ethan said. "They can't comprehend partnership or shared success." He tossed the letter into the fire, watching it curl and blacken. The past was burning away, making room for the future they were creating together. Winter came again, the second Lydia would spend in the hidden valley, but this time everything was different. She wasn't a stranger trying to find her place. She was home, with work she loved, a partnership that had deepened into genuine marriage, and a future full of possibilities. On a cold December evening, as snow fell softly outside, Lydia stood at her bedroom window, the same window where she'd watched the valley transform through the seasons. Behind her, she heard Ethan enter through the connecting door that now stood permanently open. "Come to bed," he said softly. "It's late, and we have an early meeting tomorrow." She turned to him. This man who'd been a stranger 18 months ago, who'd offered her an escape that became an adventure, who'd seen potential in her when she couldn't see it herself. "Do you remember what you said when you first proposed?" she asked. "That you valued honesty over romance, that a business arrangement was clear, with no false expectations?" "I remember. I was wrong about a lot of things then." "Were you?" "We did start as a business arrangement. We were honest about what we each needed. And we didn't have false expectations. We had realistic ones that we exceeded." Ethan crossed the room to stand beside her at the window. "What's your point?" "My point is that you were right and wrong at the same time. Right that honesty is valuable, that clear expectations matter, that practical partnership is important. But wrong that those things preclude romance or love. We built romance on top of honesty, love on top of partnership. That makes it stronger, not weaker." He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head as they looked out at the snow-covered valley together.
You're a philosopher now, along with everything else? I'm a woman who's learned that life rarely follows the paths we expect. Sometimes the detours are better than the destination we planned. This is better than anything I planned, Ethan said. Better than anything I thought possible. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the snow transform the world into something clean and new. Somewhere in the compound below, a light appeared in the bunkhouse window. Someone was up late, working or reading, or simply unable to sleep. The valley was alive with people building their own futures, all connected through the operation Ethan had inherited and transformed, that Lydia had helped shape into something sustainable and fair. I want to expand the mother's welcome, Lydia said suddenly. She's lonely in that cabin, and there's nothing keeping her there now. She could live here, have her own space, contribute however she wanted. What do you think? I think this is your home as much as mine. If you want your mother here, then she should be here. Thank you. She turned in his arms to face him. For everything, Ethan. For seeing me when I was invisible. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. For building this life with me instead of just giving me a place in yours. You make it sound like I did you a favor. You saved me, Lydia, from isolation, from becoming like my father, from the loneliness I didn't even recognize until you arrived and showed me what partnership could be. They kissed, soft and certain, two people who'd found each other through desperation and choice in equal measure, who'd built something real from the most unlikely beginning. Spring returned to the valley once more, bringing Margaret Hale back as a permanent resident. She settled into a cottage on the compound's edge, close enough to be part of the community, but far enough for independence. She took over some of Martha's household duties, managed the expanding library, and became a grandmother figure to the workers' children. The Crowe Institute grew beyond anyone's expectations. By its second year, they'd trained 43 managers from operations across the Western Territories. By the third year, they'd published a textbook on sustainable resource management that was being used by territorial officials and business schools. Lydia's name appeared on the cover alongside Ethan's, recognized as an equal author and expert. Margaret Chen expanded her mining operations using principles developed through their consulting work. Her success caught the attention of other major investors, leading to more contracts, more influence, more opportunities to spread sustainable practices throughout the industry. And Lydia herself continued to evolve. The frightened girl who'd accepted marriage to save her family was gone, replaced by a confident professional who could hold her own in any boardroom, who could teach seasoned businessmen new ways of thinking, who could build and manage complex operations. But she never forgot where she'd come from. She established a fund to help families facing the kind of medical debt that had nearly destroyed her own. She hired workers from struggling settlements, giving them opportunities and training. She wrote articles about the hidden costs of poverty, the obstacles facing women in business, the importance of creating pathways for people to escape desperation. On a warm June afternoon 5 years after that first desperate wedding, Lydia stood on the lodge's porch beside Ethan, watching a new class of students arrive for training. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, 7 months pregnant with their first child, a daughter they'd already decided to name Margaret after both their mothers. Tired? Ethan asked, noticing her shift her weight. Always these days, but content. She smiled at him. Very content. No regrets? About any of it? Lydia thought back to that cabin, that desperate morning, that impossible choice. She thought about everything that had followed, the challenges, the battles, the slow transformation from victim to victor, from desperate to empowered, from alone to partnered. Not a single regret, she said. I wouldn't change anything, because changing anything might mean not ending up exactly here. Even the hard parts, Marcus, Caroline, all the fighting, especially the hard parts. They taught me who I could be when I stopped accepting other people's definitions of me. They taught us what we could build together. She took his hand, placing it on her belly, where their daughter kicked and moved. This life, our daughter, our work, our home, us, none of it would exist without every hard choice and difficult moment that came before. Ethan kissed her temple. You're remarkable, you know that? I'm stubborn. There's a difference. You're both. And I'm grateful for it every day. As the sun set over the hidden valley, painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose, Lydia Crowe, born Lydia Hale, once a poor mountain girl with no prospects, surveyed the empire she'd helped build. Not an empire of conquest or exploitation, but one of sustainability, partnership, and genuine progress. She'd married a poor mountain man who turned out to be wealthy, but more importantly, she'd married a man who became her true partner, who saw her worth and helped her claim it. Together, they'd built something that would last, not just for them, but for the generations that would follow. The mountains stood eternal around them, holding secrets and memories. But the valley was no longer hidden, not really. It had become a beacon, drawing people who wanted to learn different ways of thinking, different ways of building, different ways of succeeding without sacrificing sustainability or integrity. And at the center of it all stood Lydia, mother, wife, businesswoman, teacher, visionary, who'd started with nothing but courage and ended with everything that mattered. She'd claimed this life, not been given it, not fallen into it, not stumbled upon it by accident. She'd chosen it, fought for it, built it brick by brick and decision by decision, and that made all the difference. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Lydia and Ethan returned to the lodge, to the warmth of hearth and home, to the life they'd created from impossible beginnings. Behind them, the valley settled into evening, lights glowing in windows, smoke rising from chimneys, the sounds of community and purpose filling the mountain air. It was a good life, a life worth fighting for, worth building, worth claiming as her own. And Lydia Crowe, who'd once counted fence posts and wondered if hope was worth the effort, had proven beyond any doubt that it absolutely was.